This meeting will be video recorded and broadcast over local access channel 8 and through the town website at www.eastham-ma.gov. Good morning, everyone. We have a really full agenda, so we're going to jump in. Pat, thank you, has distributed minutes. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at them?
Yes.
Yep, okay. Can I get a motion to accept? Kevin, and second?
I'll second that.
Martin, okay, all in favor? Aye, great. One thing done. Okay, the consultant who came to us through the Cape Cod Commission on Inclusionary Zoning will be joining us, but she can't join us till 11. So we're going to focus on the work that Jackie and analysis Jackie did. This is the development and site coverage limits. Tom, I apologize that we did a meeting, we just couldn't find it. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the meeting at all?
I haven't viewed it. I looked at the minutes,
Oh, you looked at the minutes,
but
okay.
yeah.
We got into a bit of a discussion. Anyways, we'll try to catch up as we can. So I think
It's on my list to watch it, but.
one of the things we looked at was this notion of the table, and coming out of the planning board meeting, there was a concept that, you know, let me set the table.
Mhm.
When we did this 3 years ago, we got numerical limits for development, and we set those, and we also put language in there to say these should be the maximums for these lot sizes, and that also should be considered in the context of neighborhood. And our thinking was that, let's say we had a lot size that allowed you to do 3,000, that was sort of the absolute max. But our working assumption was that if the whole neighborhood was around 1,400 or 1,500, the planning board would sort of shape projects so that they weren't all going from 1,400 to 3,000, but, you know, maybe some incremental. That was the theory. The theory is not from the planning board, it is very difficult to implement. It's not working under that scenario. And what the planning board did say is take a look at that chart, because that's really the objective numbers. So Jackie has gone off. We had a lot of discussion around the issues of site coverage limits, the definitions inherent in this, maximum building footprint, et cetera, as well as some ancillary conversations around decks and glasses and pools, et cetera. So with that, Tom, that was my real recap. We asked Jackie to go off to see if she could make some adjustments to the chart to maybe get to these objectives. And so why don't I, at this point, allow Jackie to just present her work, or did you want to do something introductory?
Wanted to thank Jackie for doing the
Yep.
work. She did pull us together very quickly.
Yep.
And what we discovered was that I don't think we can just adjust the table without pulling apart the rest of the bylaw, which is the draft that we have, because if we adjust the numbers in the chart, then we have to adjust the review threshold, and it kind of goes through. So I think that's just why you have all the info we have. So
Okay.
that, and we can figure out how we want to move forward after our discussion.
Okay. And just, Jackie, as you start to present, I'll look to the group. I have a lot of questions. Would you like to do one complete pass through, just to say, here's how I approached it, just touch at the treetops, everything?
Yep.
And then we'll come back and go kind of line by line?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Great.
thank you. As Paul has just said, you know, I think it's really important to keep in mind that if this proposal to shift from our current site coverage method to a floor area ratio method, which is similar and related, but it's not as simple as changing the chart, because the chart is relative to everything else in the bylaw. So put that out there for understanding. For review, floor area ratio is a term that relates the total gross floor area of a structure to the size of the lot that it's on. So essentially it's a percentage based system. one of the big changes here that I've proposed is to collapse the majority of our layers in the system. Right now, we have 5 bands. What I've shown you is 2. So lots under 15,000 square feet, so pretty small lots, and lots over 15,000 square feet. The reason for that, Martin had brought this up at one point, is it possible to have a universal FAR rule? It is, that exists. It significantly limits small lots, of which we have many. And so, I think that we should look at that and we can play around with the math there. Part of what I did, so there's the bylaw itself, the sort of mathematical changes, the technical changes. What I then did was apply those sort of retroactively to all of those building permits that we had collected data on, as well as those planning board decisions that we had some data on that we looked at, just to get an understanding. And I didn't reprint all of those sheets for you. You don't really need them, to give myself an understanding of how far reaching would this be. What would the impact be if we look at our typical development patterns? So I think that's just sort of in methodology, and that's in the memo that's in front of you. You have those 34 planning board approvals.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Sorry, just, Carolyn was in the waiting room. I didn't realize it till just now. So, hi, can you hear us, Carolyn?
She's on
She's
mute.
on mute.
So I didn't,
Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, everyone.
sorry, that was my fault. I didn't see you in the waiting room. We just started talking, we're
Okay.
reviewing the proposed changes to the site coverage information. Jackie O'Rourke's going through that. We just started.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I'll try to stay in the treetops here, Mary. Essentially, if you look at that memo, you'll see that the largest projects that went through planning board would probably have had tighter scrutiny under an FAR, because these FARs actually lower from our current allowance, is actually dropping down those current allowances. And I will say that I find it encouraging that in our building permit data, most projects that have happened this year, that have been permitted this year, would actually still conform, even to those more restrictive thresholds. So I think that's, to me, was an important piece to pull out, to understand that this is not necessarily going to turn every sunroom and spare bathroom into a non-conforming project, and wind up with 45 special permits that need to be applied. So that's sort of the data that I used to sort of test out the work. What would this actually look like in practice? A few of the other changes here would potentially move those site plan special permits from the ZBA to the planning board. So putting the majority of site plan review, whether it's approval or special permit, in the same regulatory body. We'd still have the same exemptions, so basements are still exempted, uninhabitable attic space, farmers' porches that are a desired architectural feature would still be exempted from these numbers.
Want to interject to that last point. So those of you who were on the task force last year will remember when we did this, we had a lot of discussion about where special permits should go. My thought was that it should be with the planning board, because it's all planning board does site plan review. And even though we're calling it a special permit because we're creating this category, it's still site plan review. So there was a lot of discussion, and it was decided that we should move that regulatory piece to the zoning board. I'm revisiting that because I think it should stay with the planning board. I think it makes more sense because it's site plan review, and that's the planning board's purview. And I think it gets confusing when you're doing some site plan review with planning board and then some with zoning board. And it just, so I asked Jackie to put that in there so we could revisit that. So we can have a discussion on it, but that's just why that was.
So I think from there, what would probably be most helpful in looking at the actual bylaw is just to flip to page 2 or scroll to page 2 in the red line copy, the proposal. I have a few printed copies of.
I'll take any of the
If you
copies,
need
yeah,
them.
okay.
Some of us are screens now, some of us are paper.
I get the memo up, nothing.
So, so can we, because I have questions on these, so we can start going these.
Absolutely.
So just help me understand this. The language we have around the language that we're Xing out that says special, maximum site coverage percentage and gross floor area. You want to go to an FAR standard.
Yes.
When we discussed this 2 or 3 years ago, when we did the development limits, we actually talked a lot about this. And Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong. My conclusion was that we didn't change the definition. This definition, we didn't adjust this. This is historically what's been on the books. And the discussion went that Eastium has a more conservative definition, which tends to make their projects the footprint of the project somewhat smaller. That's how it was represented compared to some other towns. And what I remember was whole discussions, especially about beachfront property, that the an FAR alone measurement could in fact create a situation where houses could get shorter, but they get wider.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big discussion about, is that creating the bulk that we're trying to avoid? And, the argument is, well, you're getting shorter, but we already have a 30-foot height limit, so we're never really tall. And then there were questions about the view corridors, if you had thinner and better view corridors, then neighbors could see the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing. And then the final point, again, Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we had a whole discussion about how under resilient construction that we need to think about in the future, especially for the ocean front, you want to have your properties long and narrow to the water and not broad and flat. And so that is my memory of all the debate we had. And after all that debate, we left this unchanged. So I just want to understand, is my memory incorrect? And then how do we, I just want to understand the implications of what we're doing here.
I think it's important to understand for everybody how site coverage is currently operating.
Okay.
Effectively, we already have FAR.
Okay.
Our site coverage is the ratio of the gross floor area of all floors of permanent roof structures, excluding basements.
Yep.
Divided by the lots, or the lot size divided by. So it's the same math as floor area ratio. There are bylaws in other towns where site coverage is sprawl.
Yep.
And is about impermeable surfaces.
Okay.
Which, for example, in our groundwater protection district, like when we have a project that's in that groundwater protection district, we also have to add to the site coverage any paved parking, walkways, sort of everything. Versus outside of the district, we're only looking at permanent roof structures. So the way that site coverage exists in our bylaw is already not preventing that sprawl. There's nothing in our current site coverage, because we don't limit footprint.
Okay.
That forces a building into 2 stories to keep it tall rather than long.
Other than setbacks.
Other than the setbacks, right? So, which aren't changing and aren't going away. So right now on the ground, the controlling factor for the length by width, the dimensional proportions of a structure are the setbacks.
So any of the other issues that I raised, I just respond, were those, that was my memory of the debate. So I'm just trying to understand.
No, I think we did have all those discussions. I think we were just in a different place we're in a different place now with what we're trying to resolve. Bylaw that came out of the first round. And I think the difficulty that we keep running up against is how to apply the bylaw, how to get our heads around implementing it and shaping this project. So I think if we switch to this model, which is not really, we're doing it otherwise, but we're trying to clarify the terms, and this helps us get the guardrails around the building itself. And I think the other issue that's been brought up here is everything else that's going on the site, the pools, the patios, the bocce courts, all that stuff, which in my mind, if we clarify what we want with the gross floor area as far as the buildings and see where that leads us, then if we want to go to the next step and say, okay, we want to put some guardrails on the intensity of the use of the rest of the site, then that's where I would say, okay, now we're going to go into site coverage. So we're going to have FAR gross floor area, and then a companion piece to that might be site coverage. So you would still have this whole thing, but then you'd be, we're separating the two pieces of it, but then in the end, we may put it all back together and say, you're gonna have your FAR, and then you're gonna have your total site coverage of all the impervious surfaces and everything else you got going
And
on.
the site coverage would start counting the first, second, and third shed, plus the pool and
Right, well,
anything that.
We don't have that
Parking
here.
area and,
parking area and all that stuff.
right, not yet, but we can't, sorry, we can't. I think it would be very confusing for the folks, for the builders and the architects and the developers who use this bylaw. If we don't include FAR and site coverage as separately defined and applied technical mathematical computations. Because if we're gonna have site coverage be that broader definition, your pool, your patio, your parking space, then we've got to have a way to sort of separate out FAR is this gross floor area in relation to your lot size of the dwelling or the permanent roof structures. And then we can apply additional site coverage to those other things. But the engineers have to look at the site plan and do these computations and give us the math. We need that to be clear for them.
Back to Mary's point earlier about sprawl on the particular site. So we would prefer to see buildings that are 2 stories instead of all spread out. Why don't we give same thing we did with the other zone and give a bonus saying that, you know, any livable space on the second floor above only counts at 0.9% towards your goal.
It's an added complication.
I was gonna say.
it always is, yeah.
Complication.
I guess I always come back to the question, what is the problem that we are trying to solve?
Yeah.
Or avoid creating? So are we concerned? Are we seeing projects come through that have a sprawl, that are setback to setback? And that's the issue, because what we're hearing at planning board has been about total volume. More than, I think, please jump in and tell me if I'm seeing, I think what we're hearing about is the overall volume, not necessarily the spread, which are related.
Yeah, and I think people look at those two terms interchangeably, which is, you know, so I don't think we're speaking the same language all the time. Because sometimes when I see a house and I see like the typical Cape Cod house and it's 3 different buildings, semi-attached, but no big mass. But when I see the newer buildings that are getting built, they're just massive hulks. They've got lots of roof lines and peaks and stuff. And when you look at it, you're like, oh, there's just no light coming through that at all. And so for me, when I hear about massing, I'm like, oh, that's just a massive building.
Right.
But other people think, oh, that's the goal. So I'm not quite sure which is.
Well, so I think this is
And it
really
might be
important.
it might be
So
site specific. Maybe if
the-
you're on the
the
bay,
math-
like one thing, you know.
the math has the ability to control dimensions and volume.
Right.
The section 10.3 that asks for interconnected building elements and a variety, right? That's where we talk about massing as in design. How is it organized? Versus, this is the math section.
Yeah.
Right.
So the last time we had this debate, we had it about oceanfront properties and even the then planning board
Yeah.
we're advocating that, if people want a big house with big windows facing the water, they should do it.
Sure.
Okay. And then the butters were, talking about losing views and all of this stuff. So that was the ocean. But I just want to give an example. Like, I think because of construction costs, we probably see more mobile homes coming in. And there's a mobile home that has just been put in right at it's one house in from the corner of Brackett and Old Orchard.
Mobile home modular.
Modular home.
Modular home. Yeah. Kind of gets dropped in.
It's dropped in.
Mhm.
It looks like it goes right to the setback, it's a straight line, it's like a wall there. And if that is a new type of building we anticipate for economic reasons, you know, we could have, I mean, we're thinking about oceanfront massive properties, but we could have a lot of these modular homes dropped in just being this straight wall. So
It's a ranch,
that, yeah,
right? It's a
yeah, but it's a ranch without any indentations, without any, it's
just ranch.
really wide.
Yeah,
That's
It-
architecture.
right. I mean, there is, I get it. And there's an aesthetic for lots of people. There's an aesthetic there that doesn't feel like it's what we want to see when we drive down our streets, but I don't know how far we can reach into
Oh, yeah, especially when you.
into every one of those small pieces and expect that everything, if it fits
And affordability.
dimensionally.
So wouldn't that get more into form-based code that we're gonna talk about next year, that has more to do with architecture?
Even that will only be for the historic district here.
Well, even that modular home, for example, on that,
Oh, I didn't realize that.
on that lot, it could be, you could have turned the home. I mean,
I don't know, without looking at it, I don't know. I mean,
I'm just, so,
setbacks, you know.
I'm giving that as another example because it wasn't just all beachfront, but, so I'm asking and this is the question we debated 3 years ago. You know, if the math here is going to give us more, wider sprawl kind of homes. And I don't think the planning board wants to start making decisions to make them skinny if.
So I think that's where I want to step back in to say this, the math is changing in that it's reducing the overall allowance of volume. But how we're doing site coverage right now does not protect us from sprawl.
Right.
And this change to FAR is a technical change in language.
Are
But
you saying it basically doesn't do it? It makes no changes?
the change is actually in the overall math. So if you look at the current site coverage on this new chart, those small lots, which right now under 10,000 square feet can have 20%.
Yeah.
This proposes 15.
Yep.
I've changed the bands to make that first band up to 15,000 square feet. So 14,999. The largest FAR in that range is 2,200 square feet. That's in this range, if you're now non-conforming, we have to get in all of that, but the proposal there is that you're now limited to 2,200 square feet, which is
2250.
2,250,
I just,
right? But sorry, so there's a reduction in allowance under 10,000 square feet. There's a small micro band in there, 10,000 to 15,000, that actually isn't changing. But then over 15,000, what we're proposing is an allowance drop from 13 or 12% to 11% across the board. Everything over 15,000 square feet has an 11% FAR. So it's a reduction for 3 of the existing 5 bands. And our current GFA cap is 6,000 square feet. In the proposal, I've dropped that to 4,800 square feet. Just based on sitting in planning board and frankly saying, I don't see an East Ham future in which the planning board ever says yes to a 6,000 square foot.
my concern is small lots get bought in total and combined. And so you could have a neighborhood where you take 10,000 square foot. I mean, that's what happens in other communities. They buy up the smaller lots. So I just
So
want to
just
think
devil's
about,
advocate on that.
Yeah.
If I buy 3 10,000 square foot lots and now I have a 30,000 square foot lot, why can't I then build a 3,000 square foot house? I now have a 30,000 square foot lot.
well, I mean, that's,
The neighbors will miss the cottages.
I know, but
We're not
that's
spread.
the neighborhood, that's the neighborhood issue of if everyone in your neighborhood is 1,000 square feet.
I guess but that's a different issue. That's a merger issue. I don't think we can solve that if we're changing the square footage of lots. That's a separate piece.
Well, it's only a separate issue in terms of the upper limits.
But these upper limits are reduced from the current upper limits.
And which is what the planning board sent us back to do, because we
Right.
were trying to give them flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't we have that problem already that people can combine?
Yeah, you can.
adjacent lots
Yeah.
and combine.
I mean, I can see that happening. And that's gonna be disconcerting to those neighborhoods, but just And it can happen anytime, I suppose. My gut tells me though, that that's not gonna be the first change that happens. Like people build under this, then as lots start to become more rare, they start thinking, hey, I want to build a big house, but I don't have any more big lots left. Let's see what we can do by combining them as sort of a down the road thing, which is a problem down the road. I'm not kicking the can here, but they can do that there.
We have less than 300 lots under 10,000 square feet, 278. And they're clustered in 2 or 3 neighborhoods.
Well, and so right now, those houses could go up to 20%.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
no,
I'm proposing this drops it
we're in
down to
agreement.
15, right?
So I'm gonna let this go. I mean, what I'm hearing is we've been doing FAR
Pretty
basically,
much, yeah.
and you're trying to do a technical correction. And if no one else has a concern about sprawl versus height,
Well, I think with something, I forget who actually said it already, but I think sprawl versus height, it is to some extent lot specific.
I was gonna say the exact same
Mhm,
thing.
And we can't regulate that.
Right.
Mhm.
There's no way to regulate. That has to do with project shaping and, you know, maybe that's something that if it comes up in pre-discussion with the.
And, you know, I will say when Paul and I started batting this around, we did have a footprint regulation in here as well. My concern is that that comes back with a lot of accessibility issues. Right, so accessibility issues. So if I'm building a house for my mother-in-law,
Now we're
which for her
accessibility.
to age, I'm not going to build her a 2-story home.
Right.
Right, if I need to plan for her mobility challenges, I wanna be able to build her a ranch, and I'm sorry, it's ugly. Maybe the planning board can get me to throw some dormers on it. But, you know, there are affordability and accessibility concerns for me about creating inequities in our bylaw that says, well, you've got to build those 2 bedrooms upstairs, and the fact that you know, don't have the mobility to get up there to see them.
And
Oh, well, we don't want to sprawling. I mean, I just worry about that if we're not seeing a ton of sprawling single-story homes.
Not yet. And Mary, when you were earlier, you were saying how particularly going back to the old debate, that one of the issues was oceanfront properties and so forth. And trying to have a view corridor kind of thing. Can we at some point take a look at additional language for oceanfront neighborhoods? Because one thing that's frustrating is you walk along the beach and what used to be a relatively small house is gone, and it's a big house, 2 stories, whatever, goes all over the place. And I always think of the people across the street that a few months earlier had a view.
And a little view.
The view corridor is gone, but there isn't necessarily anything there that prevents that. That's something that to address the sprawl question, at least along waterfront properties, can be put additional restrictions in there to call it a different zone or whatever. Is that something that could be considered?
it's in the planning board's criteria, visual access is there. And I think what I've started to learn is I think one of the things that certain lawyers will say to the planning board is no one has the right to a view. And so you don't have by right to a view. That's different from the planning board could shape projects to preserve a bit of a view for abutters. That's a different thing versus you have a right.
Right, but
And how do we get the planning board to do that?
Could we allow the
beat my
planning board?
usual drum is the planning board can try to shape the project and you go to the bylaws.
You got no
It
carrots
has to
you
be.
got no carrots to give out.
That's, again, if there's something that gives you a number or ratio or something hard, we can say, well, according to the bylaw, you're in a, you're sitting looking at the bay here, but the people across the street, they've had their home for 40 years and they have this beautiful view. We would like you to,
Uh-huh.
lower it. I mean, make it less sprawly or whatever. And the attorney's gonna say, well, no one has a right to review. Versus if you have something in the bylaw that's measurable.
Well,
Say, well, for this area, it can't be any more than so many feet or however you want to phrase it. But that gives you something that's specific that the planning board can go to and say, hey, look, you were planning this, you should have looked at the bylaw. Can't go beyond a certain distance.
I think that would have to be, and Carolyn, let me know if I think you could do that, but it would have to be some sort of overlay
Right.
district that would have to be
Mm.
lots along the, fronting on the shore and and lots directly across from whatever, but it would have to be
And which is not
done that way.
a fight for this coming
Right.
town meeting,
Right.
but the future could still be addressed on those grounds.
So I think part of this goes back to the site coverage. The site plan review process, and I think it's just, we're still pushing our way into this new way of doing it, where before we had all these we had these regulations, but it just wasn't the scrutiny being applied to it, where, yeah, we get the comment from the attorneys, you're not entitled to the board has to get used to being able to say, push back against that, like, and to shape the project, like you're saying, it's just, I think some of this might be able to put some sort of overlay district in, put guardrails around it, but I still, even with that, it's still gonna be, people are gonna maximize their waterfront property, gonna want everything they want. I still think part of that goes back to how we do the site plan review and just the board being comfortable exerting a little more influence, because that is in the bylaw. We have, it's just this, go
You
back
could
to this
condition-
subjectivity and just the people, how we do it and getting comfortable, like having those discussions and pushing back, and it's hard. I mean, like I said, I sympathize with that situation. It's just,
Well, because right now you just have the power of influence as opposed to, can we give the planning department some carrots or some tools to use to say that, it's at our discretion, we're going to allow you to make your house another 100 square feet bigger, which will reduce your site plan coverage.
well, I think,
Make the house 10 feet narrower, and we're going to allow you to add another 50 square feet on a second floor or something like that. Or does that get too complex?
well, I think that starts to get complex and it gets away from what we're trying to do here with having, a
Minimum
chart that you
site.
can't go beyond. I think, the shaping the project without the carrots to give out is still the core of what the planning board needs to do. And if it comes down to it, it's just improving a project with the conditions, even if the conditions seem, punitive or onerous. It's just that at the end of the day, the board feels strongly, it's like, we're gonna improve this because we have to prove something, but it's gonna be, you gotta reduce the height or shift it over to protect someone else's view corridor, because that has been an issue of concern. And then you get into whether they're gonna live with that condition and do it, or they're gonna appeal it.
Which I agree with you, board needs to.
And I'm not being critical of the board. I'm saying-
Well, anyway, I'm not
Very, very
really
tough.
either. I'm going on this past. I know there's been a couple of projects, and it's going back to years. Jim was one that had proposed that very thing, approve it with certain restrictions and the size. I forget exactly the specifics. And the board opted not to go with Jim's idea. It's like, okay, but it's something we have to start doing.
And I know I keep harping on this, but it's just, again, the way we're doing the meetings, I think if we take our time, try not to do every single meeting in one thing where we're just like, we're gonna do the public hearing, we're gonna hear from all sides, then we're gonna talk amongst ourselves and really hash it out. Because I think a lot of times it just kind of gets hurried.
Mhm.
Things get thrown out and it's kind of, everyone's filled on the spot to vote right there, one way or the other, where it's like, you don't have to do that. The board can take as much time as it feels it needs to. And it's like, we're gonna sleep on this, come back to the next meeting. And I think that's just a change in the approach, which is one of the tools we can try to do.
So, when we talk about this, we talk about the neighbors, the across the street people who lose their view. But I think, I'm just throwing this out and we can move on back to where we started. It's not just the neighbors, but it's anyone walking or driving down the street loses the ability to see water.
Yeah.
And so you could be anywhere now on Shirtlift, and not know that you're next to a bay. So just something
Yeah.
to go beyond just the neighbors, but townwide. And then, so isn't there something though, with our limits, I went back and I looked at that Bow Road Weir project, which had, say, 46,000 square, it was big. 46,
Middleton.
size.
Yeah.
Proposed.
It was 4,500, but the lot size was
It's big.
87,000
Big.
square feet,
Wait,
right?
Yep.
2 acres. So how would something like this be impacted if we changed to a simplified version of the chart?
We have the overall street size of the FAR standing.
There's
Still
still
have a cap on there.
Yeah, so one of the things in here is a reduction in that absolute cap for properties of any size. And so part of what happened through those discussions was that the existing cap is 6,000 square feet,
Right.
right? So they actually, over the course of several meetings, grew the size of the proposal from 48 or wherever it started to just under 6. Driving home the point that the chart says can go up to 6. And that's where I say I don't envision us getting real comfortable with a 5,800 square foot house on any size lot anytime soon, single family home. And so my proposal here is to reduce that cap. And that to 4,800 square feet, which is still
So
a
that
big house,
would-
but 4,800 square feet on 2
So that would
acres.
with a finished basement on top of that, makes it very.
Which is another
house.
1,000 plus.
Yeah. which is
Under
not
2
like-
acres.
Not about business, but like, they're not being restricted that much.
Yeah. So can we understand, like, I want to know, in your collapsing, under this scenario, under can you tell me what the maximum house size FAR would be? If-
Well, the maximum
Not,
is
not under, I know you get 11%, but I want to know between a 20 and a 29,000, like, what will that house be?
39.
3,900?
No,
see the,
no, 3,300. 11% times 30,000 would be 3,300.
so for example, on a 35,000 square foot lot, 11% of that is 3,850. Right now,
They go to 48.
right now, they can go bigger than that. They can go to 12%.
So, what's the max, so the maximums, if you got up to 20,000 square feet, the maximum you can have at 11% is,
20,000 square foot lot would be a 2,200 square foot house.
22.
And I should say a 2,200 square foot FAR, which is your house, your detached garage, your storage that's
Attached
over
garage,
200
yeah.
square feet, or your attached garage, right? It's all your permanent roofed structures. So if I want a 2-car garage with that FAR, I'm working with 2,200 square feet.
What's
And then
the,
the two-car garage is about 500.
Right.
Where we left off at the last meeting was that we we're gonna try to look at this chart, adjust the numbers so that we could get comfortable with even the larger, because we're trying to still have that issue of you're under the maximum, but you're still bigger. You're the first house on the block and you're under the max, but you're still way bigger than everything else. And so this was, if we could get this chart to where we felt comfortable, even if someone's coming in with the max, we can live with that. And we don't necessarily have to have that debate all the time. And then we can focus on the rest of the site plan review of, shaping the architecture and all that kind of stuff, but we don't have to. 'Cause that's what the board keeps turning itself around in knots of, like, how do we deal with these ones that are in that middle ground where, so that's where we left off the last meeting. That was where we got the aim with this chart to get those numbers.
And that drop to, and I know it's not huge, but that drop from 12, 13, or 15% to 11% reduces the allowance on the vast majority of properties in town.
Yeah,
And
no.
that's somewhat consistent with other communities in the Cape. Seeing a couple of them.
We're all over the place.
No, I mean, it's not the running average, but I'm just saying,
Yes.
there's a few examples out there.
Yes.
To touch
How
on,
about in the smaller, the less than 10,000, right? We're dropping it from 20% to 15%.
Mhm.
Does that cause issues with the small ones?
I mean, it is still gonna reduce for them, but that's really what the planning board has been looking at.
yeah.
So for example, on an
I
8,000
would-
square
I would
foot
say-
lot on a very small lot,
One of the
that's
issues.
1,200
though,
square feet, which is probably already there for a lot of this.
Yeah.
From the original debate a few years ago, though, the number went up to 20% because the example was, okay, you got a small house, a small family's living there, they have another child. They want to have another bedroom, so they can't do that.
Right.
Now you're forcing perhaps less well-to-do people out the door because they can't add on to that.
Yeah.
So we bumped it up some
Yeah.
to allow for that, for the really small houses that can use an extra bedroom or bathroom or whatever it might be. So that was the issue of that. So this is going down to 15. I'm not concerned about a 12,000 square foot lot, but I mean, the real small ones under 10
Right,
that they have
which I know is
back
only,
that's that issue.
Martin will remind us, a couple hundred.
How many do we have?
270,
270?
Yeah, and
278.
And
And most-
we actually wrote that in our report. Last time we wrote a report, we said, I think the number I had in my head was 259, but we said to the town, 259 properties out of the 5,400 are going to be
And I'm
severely
quoting
impacted.
lots, by the way,
Mhm.
if you're looking at houses as
Well,
well.
no, I
Yeah,
was
that's
looking at
what-
lots as well. I was looking at lots as well.
Well, and I'll, you know, it's important to say too, we do still have the pre-existing non-conforming carve out. Because a lot of those very small lots are already in that pre-existing non-conforming, so there is still, you know, limits for them to grow in relation to.
10,000 square foot, 20% of 10,000, that's a 2,000 square foot house on a quarter acre. That's pretty substantial.
Yeah. Good point.
You're going to all your setbacks with that size.
Right.
And what pre-existing non-conforming, describe again how it works now,
Mhm.
and are we making any changes?
There is a change to that, so, this is in 743, it's the second paragraph. Pre-existing non-conforming structures can expand by multiplying the maximum site coverage percentage corresponding to the size of the lot in which the structure. So if I have a pre-existing non-conforming house right now on 9,000 square feet, I have a 20% expansion allowance. So that max coverage, so, we'd be dropping that to 15%. So we'd be saying it's still relative to your lot size. And for those small lots, that expansion is now a 15%.
But let me ask the question, didn't we do this last week that 85 or 88% of the lots are pre-existing non-conforming? So when we look at the first set of numbers we were looking at, which we were talking about being small, but is the overwhelming majority of our stuff going to be much bigger?
That was the lot size.
Okay,
We have most of the lots in town are pre-existing to a minimum lot size, but this has to do with your
The building.
existing building, the site coverage you already have.
and this may be a legal question, are you guaranteed? Or do you have, like, if you're taking up now 15% of your lot site coverage, right? Say you have 15%, your building is already that, but you're pre-existing non-conforming.
Mhm.
You would then be able to increase yet again?
Yes,
15%
on the
of
advice of
the
town
question.
council, I believe, a few years ago. It's necessary to have a carve out for pre-existing non-conforming structures.
Carolyn,
We're creating,
could you help us understand what the parameters are around pre-existing non-conforming and, if the goal is to, move to smaller properties, what is our ability, what can we do within the legal realm there?
Sure. So if a structure is truly a lawful pre-existing non-conforming structure, they have a right under Chapter 48, Section 6 to alter that pre-existing non-conforming structure or expand it. And right now, at least under state law, the standard would be provided the permit granting authority determines that expansion or alteration is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than whatever the existing structure happens to be. So this is a little bit of a twist on it where you're then imposing, a maximum cap on the other end, but you've got to keep the avenue open that any pre-existing non-conforming structures are not completely prohibited from coming before the town and requesting some kind of alteration, but they'd have to go before, typically it goes before the zoning board of appeals. I don't know if here we're altering that under this language because it doesn't say who you'd go to, but typically it would be the zoning board. Sorry, Jackie, were you about to say something there?
No, go ahead, sorry, I mean, interrupt.
I know. We might want to clarify this, particularly where I understand you want site plan review to be consistently applied by the planning board. You might want to clarify if this is something that goes to the zoning board as opposed to the planning board. But, they're going to look at whatever percentage or square footage limit that you ultimately put out there for residential structures. If they're non-conforming now and they want to exceed that amount, or maybe they're non-conforming now, they want to add on, but it's a modest addition, it's still somehow or other going to bring them under the 20,000 square foot limit. They still have to go to the zoning board to at least get approval for that alteration to the structure.
So can I ask two things? What I'm hearing from you is to say, you sort of need to have a carve out. You've got to give them some allowances, but the level of allowances is determined locally in terms of what you
Correct.
can do. Okay, the second
Correct.
question I have is, I hear a lot of conversation about, we don't want the family who's having the second child or the mother who has to, the sort of, we need an extra bedroom, we need an extra bathroom, we need a TV room for the kids to play in or something. What if the pre-existing non-conforming were allowed a flat amount, like as opposed to a percentage of, which gets much bigger? The notion that, if you are above the limit, you can go up to another 500 square feet or so. I'm spitballing this out, but just to make it more like responding to those individual needs, the reasonableness needs of small time people without going to a much bigger expanse.
Well, I think if you go back into the proposal where this section is under the chart, dropping it from, for example, on a 20,000 square foot lot from a 13% allowance to an 11% allowance. In this example, right, a 3,200 square foot house on a 20,000 square foot lot, so something that's already pre-existing non-conforming, their allowance is 352 square feet.
Okay. So
Right,
we're
so when
already,
it's percentage based, it's already a very small.
that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Does the math work?
Yes.
So these
It's
15%,
gonna be 11% of your lot size.
okay.
Oh, the lot size, not the existing structure.
Oh, sorry.
No, the first,
No, the
Structure.
Structure. How often can they do this? How often do they get this
every
extension?
5 years.
Every 5?
Oh, it says not within, what the rule says you can't do it again within 5 years, but I don't know how we close that up. I also don't understand why we stepped that number. That I understand stepping the number for smaller houses for the fire.
Mhm.
But when we're talking about the non-conforming, I don't know why we wouldn't just say 10% across the board.
I thought about that. I think it's a great question. I proposed it here to be in line with what was existing because this is what has been legally approved before, to have it in relation
Yeah.
to the percentage, but if it could be a flat.
Yeah, we're just creating more a sawtooth on top of a sawtooth.
Mhm.
Yeah, because right now, my next question is gonna be, at the 15,000 square foot lot, you can go to 2250. And if your lot's 1 foot bigger, you
Mhm.
just lost 600, or rather, 600 square feet.
I don't know a way to avoid the
you have to-
sawtooth without a universal FAR.
So that's my
Or,
point.
or district
So
overlays.
we already have
which
that
is
issue that we can't solve. We're just
Yeah.
making that worse by saying, oh, if your house was a little bit, if you were more non-conforming, you get more of our grace and you can get it bigger.
Yeah.
That's my issue with the non-conforming piece. So
Yeah, the math works that way, but you also are not guaranteed to get that, because you have to get the special permit.
Yeah.
And the burden's on the applicant to
prove that it's
substantiate that you
substantially,
need all of that, and the
and that-
board,
not substantially more.
because it's a special permit, the board has the authority to say, no, you haven't convinced us we're gonna award you or grant you something less. But smaller or something. Again, that gets into individual case by case basis, but
Carolyn said something that I just want to ask for information. Carolyn, you said a lawfully pre-existing non-conforming. What does the term lawfully mean?
Folks, you might have something that was perhaps unlawful when the zoning change occurred. And if it was an unlawful structure, meaning it was put up in violation of zoning, or it was put up without the benefit of a building permit, whatever the case may be, it isn't automatically protected as a pre-existing non-conforming structure. Most pre-existing non-conforming structures are lawful. I would think that if we had any that were unlawful, that there would have been some zoning enforcement action that was taken at some point in time. But, let's suppose you had a single family home on a lot, and at the time that the single family home was constructed, the lot area met zoning requirements, the square footage of the house, complied, or the footprint of the house complied with all of your setback requirements, et cetera. And then at one point they come in and they ask for permission to put on an addition. And maybe that addition complied with zoning. Maybe that addition purported on paper to comply with zoning, but then someone goes out there with their measuring tape after the fact and says, this is in fact not the size of what you were supposed to have built, or this is not the exact location of where you said you were going to build it. There could be situations where ultimately the structure that is there was not put up lawfully, meaning pursuant to a building permit and pursuant to any sort of zoning relief that might have been necessary. So just to make it clear that we only protect lawful pre-existing non-conforming structures. And, a few years ago, the statute was changed that if something was built without the benefit of a building permit, or it was built with a building permit but ultimately resulted in some kind of a zoning violation, after 6 or 10 years, there's now what they call a statute of repose, meaning if we didn't take zoning enforcement action within 6 or 10 years of when we either issued a permit or didn't issue a permit, but became aware that this structure was built without complying with zoning, we've only got 6 or 10 years to bring zoning enforcement action. After that period is foreclosed, then it's deemed to be a pre-existing non-conforming structure. So I don't think you're going to come across very many unlawful pre-existing non-conforming structures, but there is the possibility that you could have a scofflaw out there who tries to do something that they weren't permitted to do.
Lawful need to be in our language.
Big question.
yeah, we should probably just be specific about it. It would override that and state statute, but we could put it in. Carolyn, is that limitation just based on for structures, or does that apply to like uses?
No, it also applies to a use. But since we were talking about, floor area ratios and square footage, I limited it to structures.
Okay.
And if it helps, because I think this question is probably there. So then in practice, up in the office, when we have these proposed projects coming forward, right, and someone's saying, well, we're pre-existing non-conforming, we look into that, right? We're saying, well, how did you get to be so? Right? And sometimes it's straightforward. Well, the house was built in 1955. Okay, there's not a lot we're going to do about that. Sometimes we have one now that is a deck that is over the line, which makes it pre-existing non-conforming. And was it permitted work? Hard to say when we search the database, but we do what we can to find out. And, ultimately, like in this example, we say, well, I can look at aerial photos and say, well, that deck has been on for more than 10 years. And so is this what we're going to chase down versus you know, the walls of your home were built 15 feet off of your blueprint.
So along that, Carolyn, if someone tears down a property, a building, do they relinquish any pre-existing non-conforming rights?
Not necessarily. It depends on how you define an alteration or expansion. Most bylaws do have a provision for like reconstruction, and sometimes it might say that you're limited to reconstruction within what was the prior footprint. Some might allow for a greater expansion than that. And then, of course, let's not forget Mother Nature. Mother Nature comes along, a good nor'easter hits the coast and wipes out, destroys a structure. There's always a right to rebuild, even if it's pre-existing non-conforming, when it has been destroyed by Mother Nature.
Yeah.
And then, of course, let's not forget, but there may also be instances where a structure or use is ultimately abandoned. And, if it's abandoned for 2 years or more, then maybe they do lose their non-conforming status. So it's not a real clear-cut answer to the question. It depends on a lot of factors.
That's something that comes up a lot, though, is with the zoning board, is someone wants to tear down the house and build something new, but they're still utilizing the pre-existing non-conforming aspect of the house that they're tearing down is a pre-existing non-conforming, and they're trying to utilize that. That gets them in the door to the zoning board. But then, kind of logic suggests like you're wiping this all out, so you should just build the new house to conform with it, or at least be improving the setbacks, building the same footprint but not increasing it. And then that's always a struggle with justifying that. So,
Your folks in the waiting room.
oh yeah, I think, we're coming up on 11.
And then my last question for Carolyn. When we talk about zoning enforcement action against a non-conforming, if it hasn't been done within, like you said, 6 to 10 years, does just sending a letter saying that you've done something, or do you have to complete that action of forcing them to remediate?
No, we would have to, first like send them a notice. It's usually a process. We'd send them a notice saying you are in violation and you're given, let's just say 30 days to bring the property into compliance. Or if the property required, let's say you built something, you were permitted to put on a deck, but you encroached into the side or the rear yard setback. Well, then your options are, I guess, rip the portion of the deck that's offending the bylaw down, or your option could be to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and see if you could get a variance for the encroachment. Something would have to be done, and we would have to notify the property owner. We'd have to give them a certain period of time to try to correct it. And
let the clock run out?
I'm sorry?
What if they just ignore us and let the clock run out?
If they ignore us, then eventually what we need to do is we need to go to court, and we need to get a court to order them to comply with the bylaw.
And if we had failed to go to court 6 or 7, let's say we sent out a notice 10 years ago, we didn't take them to court. Now they're coming to do something big. We can't go back and say, well, we told you 9 years ago that you were out of compliance. That's not going to hold up because we didn't go to court, follow through.
I don't think it would. I mean, I suppose we could try that and say, no, we're not going to acknowledge this as a pre-existing non-conforming structure because you were told 6 years ago that you needed to do X, Y, and Z. And you could try to address it right then and there, because you never have more leverage than you do when an applicant is before you looking for approval of something, right? But I could also see a situation where an applicant says, no, you had either 6 or 10 years to force me to comply. Yeah, you sent a couple of letters off, but you didn't follow through. So you've waived your right. My guess would be we wind up in court on that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Point that was raised about, staying within the same footprint. Did we address that? anywhere? We've talked several times about houses where they tear down the existing house and then want to build something that's not within the existing footprint that would have been pre-existing non-conforming. Do we need anything to address the issue that Carolyn raised?
So for example, they have a one-story house and they're gonna reuse that foundation, totally tear the house off, but reuse the foundation and build two-story house on the same footprint. But the one-story house was already pre-existing non-conforming,
Yeah,
be a special permit.
Yeah, they're increasing the nonconformity.
Right.
And what Paul was saying earlier is that if you're going to scrape the site
Right.
at the very minimum, you should not be increasing the nonconformity.
But I could see, say their nonconformity is about a setback on one side on that footprint, not about their FAR.
right.
So adding 2 stories doesn't increase the setback nonconformity, doesn't create a new nonconformity. But, and this is where zoning determination comes into play, the building inspector might say, actually, that is an increase in your setback nonconformity because now your neighbors are looking at 20 foot wall.
Yeah, that's how we,
Right, so
that's how
that
we
you-
looked at it, yeah. Like if you had.
If you're
That comes from the zoning
If you're
determination.
expanding up within the setback, that triggers like a special permit. Even if you're in the same footprint, but you're putting a second floor on and your house is in. That's.
Can I just want to do a check here. This is a good discussion. We probably need another half hour, 45 minutes to complete this discussion. So, and we do have a consultant with us on the inclusionary. So I'm wondering whether we switch now, try to dedicate the next hour or so, and then we might take a little 5-minute break and then come back and try to get through this. Great. Thank you. So you want to do the introduction?
Yeah, so, switching gears into the inclusionary, we have Alexis from Barrett Consulting. On with us. Hi, Alexis. Can you hear us all right?
Oh, she's on mute.
Yes, hi.
Hello, and Rachel Butler, our housing coordinator, is sitting in with us as well. So I
Oh, there's Rivers.
had, so just quick background, Alexis, her Barrett Consulting is also the consulting firm for the county shared regional housing agency or entity.
Mhm.
And so through that, we were able to have Alexis work on some analysis of our current bylaw several months ago. Then based on that, I asked Alexis to help us with the draft bylaw, which she put together. I didn't actually attach the correct document last night and I realized, so you guys haven't seen it. So Alexis, unfortunately, no one had really a chance to go through it. So I'll have to kind of walk through it. I gave
Okay.
everyone has hard copy here of your markup.
Okay.
And so
Yeah,
where
okay.
the primary thing we were trying to resolve was, can we make some sort of carve out for projects that are only small scale projects that are only creating, 1 or 2 inclusionary units where those units do not have to be on the state's SHI. Our bylaw right now is designed so that every affordable unit we create, we want them to be on the SHI, but with that comes a lot of requirements on the developer to adhere to state regulations and requirements and run the lottery, and we were having some issues with trying to work with smaller scale developers and try to resolve that. So that's kind of where I asked Alexis to try to look at our bylaws, see if we could resolve that issue, have some sort of carve out. But then there were a lot of other kind of technical adjustments that as she looked through our bylaw, some of the language was cumbersome. So I guess I'll preface, like, it was resolving that issue, but then kind of going a once over to kind of simplify it, clarify it as best we could, to make it more easy to implement. And I guess I'll leave it at that, and I'll let Alexis turn over to Alexis to walk us through what she did with the bylaw. And Alexis, sorry, I introduced Carolyn Murray is our town legal counsel from KP Law. She's on with us.
Rachel,
Awesome.
before you start going over the details here, can I just ask Carolyn a global question? We're taking the inclusionary zoning law. We took the models of the zoning bylaws. And which my understanding was the intent was to provide a vehicle for towns to incentivize affordable housing. Do we have any issues with? I mean, I think Rachel, in a conversation we had with her a couple weeks ago, if we're stripping out all of the regulations that come with being on the SHI, do we get into issues of fair housing? Do we get in, what are the, it just seems like, using seasonal communities, which allows you to do the attainable housing, is kind of a little bit of a loophole here. And I'm just trying to figure if there's any legal issues before we go down this road. Do you have any concerns about the directions we're going down, Carolyn?
I haven't had a chance to fully review the latest draft, so I'm not going to comment on that. I was at a meeting last night and had a meeting at 9 o'clock this morning, so I'm sort of skimming this for the first time this morning. But in answer to your question, Mary, taking out the regulatory aspects of it, what that really means is we're just saying we want to create units, but they aren't going to be eligible for inclusion on the town's subsidized housing inventory. Because in order to be eligible units on the SHI, we have to have a regulatory agreement signed, we have to have an affirmative fair marketing plan, and we have to have a tenant selection plan. You can take those requirements out and still have something that is like workforce housing, attainable housing, something like that. It just isn't going to be a unit that qualifies towards your 10% subsidized housing inventory with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. Now, if the goal here is not so much to worry about your 10%, but your goal here is that housing is incredibly expensive in Eastham and the general area, and we've got starting salary teachers, police officers, firefighters, DPW workers, who we can't attract to work here because they can't afford to live within, a mile's drive of Eastham, then maybe that's a more pressing priority for you than having units count towards the SHI. So that's the regulatory aspect of it. As far as fair housing or the Federal Fair Housing Act and concerns about that, I don't really see that there's an issue for the town unless we are actually acting as an employer. As a landlord, say to, if we are going to develop and we are going to rent out units, then we're going to have to worry about our own actions. But otherwise, you think of almost any kind of, multifamily development that exists or has been built in Eastham, whether it's been under 40B or otherwise, we don't get into the selection process other than, through the regulatory agreement where we say, 25% of the units have to be available and occupied by, someone who earns up to 80% of the area median income. We don't get into their process. That's up to the monitoring agents, and that whole process only applies to the affordable units. So as far as the market rate units, the property manager, the property owner, whoever it is that constitutes, the landlord, is going to have to worry about fair housing laws and compliance with that, and not discriminating against anyone on the basis of housing. But I don't think just including some requirements in a zoning bylaw puts us at risk, if you will, of opening ourselves up to any kind of a liability.
And you would not anticipate any adverse reaction from the AG's reviewing this finding that maybe the kind of modifications we make are in conflict with the intent of the legislation. It's, I know you've separated out the regulatory. I'm just,
Mhm.
and I'll stop there. I just want to understand.
Yep. No, and again, I haven't had a chance to read through what Alexis has drafted, but I've certainly done enough work with Barrett Planning Group over the years that I'm sure it's perfectly fine. But I have done like employee housing or staff housing, and I think I shared this with Paul. Like, for example, there are other communities such as Edgartown that they have had a zoning bylaw for staff housing. Little
Mhm.
different, from what you might be proposing here, but they have a similar issue that they need places for people, who can afford to live on the island while also working there. So they had a staff housing bylaw that was, I don't even know when exactly it was originally drafted.
Excuse me, Carolyn, when you talk about staff
Yep.
housing, are you talking about town staff or any employer staff?
No, private employers being
Okay,
able to
thanks.
offer housing for their employees.
Okay, great, thanks.
They happen to use the term staff housing, but yeah, the attorney, we recently, I want to say within the last 2 years, we did make some changes to that because folks felt that it was still a little too restrictive as originally drafted. And that went back into the Attorney General's office within the last 2 years. It was originally approved by the Attorney General, and the modifications were approved by the Attorney General too. So I think there's certainly an acknowledgement, and I think the whole seasonal communities provision of the Affordable Homes Act kind of reflects that there is an acknowledgement that having affordable workforce housing is really reached a crisis concern in a lot of communities. So I think that there's a recognition by the Attorney General's office that I'm not saying that they would approve every single bylaw that comes across their desk to this effect, but they're not outright denying them on the basis that we're restricting who can live in them.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hijack that. I just wanted to understand before we went through the details if we were on solid legal ground. So, sorry, Rachel. If you want to, not Rachel, excuse me,
Alexis,
Alexis. I'm reading Rachel's name and
we all avoid saying Alexis.
Alexis. So I'm sorry, Alexis, if you want to walk us through your
Sure.
proposal.
No, I really appreciate those questions because the fair housing piece, as I had brought up in our previous conversation, for us, I mean, that is, kind of one of the biggest pieces to wrestle with, and we often the requirements that the state has for SHI eligible housing. For non-SHI eligible housing, it still is like almost like a safe harbor, I guess, if you will. But it's not, there's, I think handled the issue, in, the best way here, where the zoning should be, as we talked about before, kind of sufficiently, give the board and give the town sufficient room to be able to approve, projects that include income restricted housing. We'll kind of generally call, whether it's 80% on the SHI, 80% off the SHI, 120%, whatever, income restricted housing. And just feel, I guess, comfortable with the ability to understand that some projects will go on the SHI, some will not. Because the core requirement for SHI eligibility is that it is, approved by a subsidy program, which for this type of unit, if it were on the SHI, would be the local initiative program because there isn't, other subsidy involved. And so with that removed, the town is essentially playing the role of what the state would be as the subsidizing agency, if you will. So I see, am I able to share quickly just?
Oh, you want to share?
Well, I wanted to just show, before getting into this, actually just the organization of just so people can see, since I know you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, that's also on me. I didn't get it to Paul until yesterday morning, so I understand there's going to be more review and whatnot, and that's fine. But I do just want to first just show you kind of the crosswalk of where some of the sections may have gone. And so, one of the biggest things that you'll notice in the difference is the original bylaw is called inclusionary zoning special permit. And I think one of the big changes that we have suggested here is that the way the basics of your inclusionary zoning is written, there's no need for it to be a special permit in and of itself, because typically in the original zoning, it's referring to the statutory framework within the special permit provisions in the Zoning Act that allow for special permits as, for incentives for providing affordable housing. But as the bylaw was written, there weren't any incentives. It was really just a requirement. And so there are still provisions in this current draft for where a special permit tied to the inclusionary zoning may make sense, such as if they want to do off-site units or if they want to do a fee in lieu of. But in general, the inclusionary zoning itself doesn't need to have the special permit tied to it. So you'll see that in kind of the approval process. What that would mean would be it'd be in the kind of, it's going to be really important that you're strict about when if there's a by right use. I don't think there's any instance in your zoning bylaw right now where a by right use would trigger this. But theoretically, if there were, something that was by right that triggered inclusionary zoning in the future, it'd be on kind of the building commissioner in working closely with the planning department to ensure that the project has met the IZ requirements before issuing any building permit. And so we talk about that in here. But that, I just wanted to explain that. And then, kind of, you can see all of the different headings, but just to kind of see where some things relate to each other. When you're reviewing the draft later, if you're having trouble following, this kind of may help. So I did just want to share that in case you were looking for where something landed. Now, I know that you had the red line version up, which is fine. I had a lot of my highlighted questions on another version. So maybe what I'll do is, if you want to put the red line version back up, I will, on my end, just have the highlights up so I don't forget to ask a question.
No, you had the other one that had the highlights, the different colors.
Yeah, because I wanted to flag some questions, particularly for town council.
No, and that's fine. We have it. You want to bring that version up on the screen? That's fine.
Sure. Okay.
We have it here too.
All right.
It's in the.
All right. So.
That's easy to read, that's easier. Yeah.
Let me just increase the zoom a little bit here. Okay. So again, talking about in the original purpose and intent statement, there was language about diversifying the types of housing, and there was reference to the incentive tied to special permit provisions in the Zoning Act. But the way that IZ was written previously, there wasn't any incentive tied to anything. It was just you need to, this is the requirement for any project that triggers 5 units. So we just made a little note here that if you want to, in your purpose statement, reference diversifying the types of housing in the community, it's going to be really important that you think about the logical places to tie in incentives. And so I'll talk about that as we kind of go through this. And, I can give kind of examples of how other towns have done it. But if there are no incentives, then I don't think the purpose statement should reference diversifying the types of housing at this time. It doesn't mean that later, because I know, Paul, the big framework, the big objective for this kind of, rehashing your IZ was, as you said, was to give the town a little more flexibility with SHI eligibility versus not. So maybe that's not a priority for this conversation, and you may come back to your IZ in the future. But I did just want to point that out. If the purpose statement is going to refer to diversifying the types of housing, there's gotta be some sort of incentives there, as well.
Rachel, can I just clarify? Alexis, excuse me, Alexis, oh my God. We knew we didn't, again, when we did the inclusionary zoning, we didn't have enough information available to conclude incentives. But what we did do when we updated the DCPC last year, the whole central business district, is we included height bonuses.
Mhm.
So we're kind of backing into incentives. I guess the part, we didn't have enough data to really formulate incentives at the time townwide.
Understood.
We were doing it more strategically as we were rezoning certain other sub-districts.
Yep. And that makes perfect sense. I think, in a kind of continued exercise, it might be worth looking at the bylaw to see other areas. Like, for example, I have not looked at the open space residential site development, so I don't want to, promise that, but sometimes, that might be a place where it makes sense to allow for, even further reduction of lot sizes or something in an OSRD or something like that. So it might just be worth doing kind of a zoning scan to see, or if there's, certain, even doing an overlay or something where maybe it does make sense to allow certain types of relief to tie into your inclusionary zoning. So just
Alexis, before we move on, I don't understand why this, this point 2, because there's no incentive, this statement doesn't fit. I don't understand that.
So because the way the IZ bylaw was written, and this diversify the types of housing available in the community, that's from your current bylaw. The way that the IZ bylaw was written, it wasn't doing anything to help diversify the housing types available in the community. It would diversify price points because you're requiring some affordability if a project would trigger it. But usually the types of incentives that are tied to inclusionary zoning are actually diversifying housing in some way. It might be that, for example, the building height one, that's a great example of where you've incentivized, you've encouraged the creation of mixed use housing by give and take. You're giving this additional building height in exchange for affordability. Or it might be, we only allow certain types of multifamily or something, or allow additional density or something like that. So it is actually helping create more than just single family homes. That's, I think, so if you're going to talk about the purpose of the bylaw to diversify the types of housing as written to your point about not having at the time the kind of information available to decide where and how to do that, that's all that means. So I think if the purpose truly is to diversify the types of housing, maybe not right now, but that should be a continued exercise of this group of the town to look at where in the zoning, or even zoom out of the zoning and just look town-wide, where would it make sense to diversify housing a little bit, and then see what you can do within your zoning and within the IZ to incentivize the provision of affordable housing in exchange for XYZ.
Some of the other things we're thinking about for next year would lend itself to that. So if we revisit the single family to multifamily conversion bylaw, that could be an incentive tied to the inclusionary. If we want to look at the motel, hotel, cottage colony conversion, like right now, we just say it's got to be converted to year-round rentals. You could put on in there that allows some incentive, a bonus, if you will, that like you can do more with that conversion if you're going to create multifamily out of it or something like that.
Yes. And that's an example that that's another very good example, the conversion, the motel conversion one. I think there's some other thing I had pointed out in the memo, some conversion aspect where the ability to convert, you might allow the ability to convert a building, but if it's still bound by, the density requirements of the district, it may not generate a feasible project. It may never happen. And so by again, those exchanges, those incentives, granting the density necessary to actually make that conversion possible in exchange for affordability, that's another good example. So I think that's an ongoing conversation, and a great one to have is just kind of where can we couple this with the zoning or with our vision for the community to actually help fulfill that part of the mission, which is to diversify the types of housing within the community.
Could an example of that be, by right, you could build a duplex? What if it said, by right, you could build 2 duplexes as long as you could do the setbacks and everything?
Well, you could build a 3-family, that's a 3-family.
Yeah. Something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, there's all sorts of, I did share with Paul, and I did not, this is more just for your own leisurely reading. We had, under the SRHS, prepared kind of a summary of inclusionary zoning Cape Wide. It's like an 18-page document, I think.
We got that.
And yeah, so at your leisure, you can feel free to peruse that and just kind of see how other towns approach incentives. Because sometimes it's going to be different by community. Sometimes communities may name a particular zoning district where, will allow a reduction in various provisions. It might be a parking reduction. It might be a height increase. It might be more lot coverage, all sorts of ways you can look at it, but it needs to, so you can get ideas from other communities, but ultimately it's going to be based on what makes sense for Eastham. And I do recognize that with you guys have a DCPC, which amending that is, I assume, a more challenging process given the fact that it is a DCPC. So I know that does have more of a process tied to it, but there may be other aspects of the zoning. I do think it'd be an interesting, look at the motel conversion, look at, and again, I've not looked at it at all, but the open space residential, that would be another good place to look. Parking requirements sometimes are another place that, if it makes sense for the community, it doesn't always, but where sometimes people have, incentives tied to that as well. So when comparing to the red line, we did make a little bit of changes to the purpose and intent statement. I mean, nothing major, but I think one of the key things that we wanted to emphasize is that if you want to create affordable housing, I mean, that needs to be really clear right up front. You want to facilitate the creation of affordable housing units, including but not limited to those eligible for the subsidized housing inventory. So I think front and center, really emphasizing that that's the purpose. But I'll allow you, all, separately to kind of look and see the changes in the red line and if you have questions. In the applicability, I mean, we just added a little bit there, but it's still substantively the same. It's about a net increase of 5 or more dwelling units. Not gonna ask town council on the spot, but if in your own notes, I know Paul had asked about the subdivision aspect, and I would love in the future your opinion on whether, I see inclusionary zoning bylaws that specifically say that, and I know there's kind of established case law to say why that may be problematic. So we left that out, but I'm not sure if this is sufficiently clear that, it's really kind of would be applying to, a project. If it needs to specify that it's for multifamily, for example, or if it needs to specify that it does not apply to single lots created through subdivision, or if it's fine just to not touch that. But just a flag for.
And I can just jump quickly because I did respond to Paul the other day and address that question, the Isola case out of Stoneham. I think is what you're actually referring to.
Mm-hmm.
I think the issue in that case was the fact that the subdivision approval was based on also having to comply with that inclusionary affordable housing requirement as well. It was like, in other words, subdivision should be one approval, not to say that there can't also be inclusionary zoning that might also apply to units that are built in that subdivision. But I think what the land court was really getting at there was that, a subdivision approval should rise and fall on its own merits under
Yes.
Chapter 41.
Yes.
And should not be delegating that authority to compliance with, another provision of the bylaw.
Yep.
So I don't have a problem necessarily. If you want the inclusionary zoning bylaw to also apply to new lots that may be created.
Okay.
But I think we do want to be careful and mindful that, and again, it's only a land court decision. I don't mean any disrespect to the land court, but, it doesn't mean it applies to Eastham. It just means that it might be instructive to us. Let's not make the same mistake that Stoneham made when we draft this. And I think as long as they still apply to, say, separate tracks, and perhaps the way to do that is, it's one thing to have a subdivision that might be approved by the planning board, but then when someone seeks to actually obtain building permits under that, now to your point, Alexis, that's when they're going into the building inspector, and that's when somehow or other the inclusionary zoning might actually be triggered. The only complication I will say with subdivisions and inclusionary zoning is, I had this conversation come up in Wellfleet a couple of years ago because they made some changes to their bylaw. And they did want inclusionary zoning to apply to lots created under a subdivision. A developer can come in with, let's just say, a 20-lot residential subdivision and get it all approved by the planning board. That subdivision doesn't mean that a single unit is going to be built or created.
Right.
Then what could happen is the developer never has any intentions of actually building a house. The developer then sells the 20 lots to, let's say, every single one of us that are on this Zoom, we all buy a lot, and then we go in separately to the building department eventually to get our building permits. Now we're developing or creating one residential unit at a time. Not going to trigger inclusionary zoning. So
Right.
that's something that bothers us. Is that something that we're okay with? I have a hard time in my own mind thinking through, even if you had a 20-lot residential subdivision, and let's say, that inclusionary zoning is going to kick in, with lot number 8, for example. Well, who wants to be the lucky one among us who's the 8th person seeking a building permit for that residential subdivision? And now I say, but I bought this as, what I thought was going to be my dream home, my retirement home. And now you're telling me that because I'm lucky unit number 8, that mine has to be affordable. So I think we have to think about the practicality of it too.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
So in conclusion, Carolyn, subdivisions, the planning board you can't conflate the two laws. So the planning board can't say to a subdivision, you have approval, and oh, by the way, you need 20% of affordability. That's where, under this land court decision, you can't have those together. Is that
You can't link the subdivision approval or denial based on whether or not you meet the inclusionary zoning requirement. You're under a subdivision, you are only supposed to consider your subdivision rules and regulations. You might still need to get anything built. You might still need conservation approval, zoning approval, planning approval, site plan approval, whatever it might be. You can't require that you get those other approvals in order to say that your subdivision is approved. So they do operate on separate tracks and separate statutes. So that's what I say. I think the issue is not so much when a lot is created, but really when dwelling units are created. And how do we then capture, when dwelling units are created, what units do we want to capture to make sure that we have some of those set aside as inclusionary?
Yeah, I think the only time that it's gonna work that way is if the developer is subdividing and they're building, like an Eastward Homes or maybe a Creek Associates or somebody, they're building all the houses as part of that subdivision, rather than selling them off. That's the only time I've seen it where the inclusionaries kicked in, but they've actually had to build one of those houses that would be affordable. So I think it does create a logistical problem with having it in the bylaw that way. Which I think we could take it out, because in that scenario, if we took it out, took the subdivision out, and that developer is subdividing a building, they are building, they would trigger it just through the amount of, it's tied to the development. I think we could do it that way, not have it tied to the subdivision creation of the lot, but a development under one developer's.
Mhm.
I can tell you in the past, I've built a house like that and the developer sells me the lot and I apply for the building permit and then ends up building my house because I can only buy the piece of property from him and only use him as a builder, but I took on all the risk and I owned the lot. And I think in that case, I would have bypassed. I would have been the one applying for the building permit, even though Cape Associates is building their 10th house next, in the road.
Mm,
Easy to get around, I think.
yeah.
Can we do stuff like just, if you're doing a subdivision, do fees in lieu of? If you're creating a 20-house subdivision and we can send it to the housing trust fund, say that, 10% or 20% of the value of these.
Well, yeah,
lots we create.
there's language in here that we will go through. That's
Okay. We should probably keep going. Sorry, Rachel, with all these questions. If you could keep walking through.
Alexis.
Alexis.
Um,
I think you
So-
want to hear from Rachel at some.
Rachel, please,
Say-
you should start reprimanding me. Stop.
Um, so for the definitions, I mean, we don't need to walk through that there. You can take a look, but there are a few places, just, for town council's kind of perspective on if we're talking about affordable housing and workforce housing, does there need to be a definition then for a workforce housing restriction? Or should we have a sufficiently general definition that kind of covers both? Does it need to be called something else? Can it still refer to sections 31 through 33 in chapter 184? So just kind of wrestling with that. Don't need to answer now. Again, I know you're just getting this in front of you, but that is just something that we wanted to ask about if the bylaw is going to, because I mean, I've looked at examples of bylaws that have inclusionary zoning that kind of applies to both, and it doesn't really kind of, I guess, give me the clear answer on that. So just something to consider. And then, we added some definitions based on either changes to the bylaw or just because we thought it would be helpful because they're referred to. So unless there's no questions, we probably don't need to talk about the definitions for purposes of this call, just to keep things rolling.
Yep.
Now, for the mandatory provision of inclusionary housing units, it is not intended that someone gets to pick and choose from these options. These options were for us to discuss. Okay, it'd be one, the other, something else altogether. But in the original bylaw, there was a very kind of long table that I think you could simplify by just having a kind of standard approach. And I know maybe you might think, 10 or 15% sounds low, but when you make fractional calculations round up, that it ends up being more than that in practice. And I'll show you that when I kind of shift over. I have a kind of a spreadsheet where I showed in theory how this would play out for up to projects up to 30 units, just so you can see the kind of slight differences. But, one of the things is if we do, you're almost kind of creating here, you have an affordable housing unit and a workforce housing unit. And so if you're further trying to distinguish between affordable housing units that you want the zoning to very clearly say need to go on the SHI and affordable housing units that don't need to go on the SHI, to me, and I certainly open to discussion or correction or anything, that almost sounds like you're almost making 3 types of units instead of 2. And the reason being because when, in previous conversations, I think the hope was that the bylaw would still sufficiently tie an applicant to that SHI eligibility piece over a certain size. So, and at the same time, there was hesitance to simply say affordable housing restrictions are intended to be eligible for inclusion on the subsidized housing inventory unless waived by the planning board. That, something like that would be the easiest way to go. But I understand there's maybe some hesitance about that. So for that reason, I think that, we were trying to play around with, well, how can we make it not so messy, that you have affordable housing units that are SHI eligible, ones that are not SHI eligible, and workforce. And, one way that you could think of it is that for those projects that would only be creating one inclusionary unit, which would be, say, under 10, just call it a workforce housing unit. And then you have your workforce housing, which obviously is not SHI eligible. And then over that is when the affordable housing requirement kicks in. And that is where I think if the town, it's all about your own goals with this. If the goal still is SHI eligibility there, then having that kick in at that 10%, now you just have those two paths. You have under 10, the requirement is, 10% workforce can be workforce. And then over 10, it changes a little bit where you have this kind of basic requirement for affordable housing units with the intent being SHI eligibility. So that kind of two path, the workforce and the affordable, that's what options 1 and 2 do. Option 3 is the one where I've never seen a bylaw say this. I've not seen, of course, every inclusionary zoning bylaw, but it's basically saying, okay, so you have this requirement where the this highlighted note here would only be left in if you went with something like option 3, which is saying for any project that's creating 2 or more inclusionary housing units, an affordable housing unit shall qualify for inclusion, with the implication being that if it's under that 2, well, then that's where you have your local affordable housing restriction that is removed from those. And that's kind of the only way we could think to do that. I'd love, some kind of feedback on that, but having it actually be the workforce housing requirement first helps avoid that 3 types of restrictions you're talking about. So I think that's the biggest thing we want feedback on. And I have like I said, I'll switch to a spreadsheet that has kind of 3 tabs that I think was shared with you that shows how those would play out.
Alexis, we have a question.
Well,
Yeah.
Can you just say again, kind of what you just said about the difference between the 3 options?
Yeah. So yeah. And let me show it with this spreadsheet because it probably makes it clearer than my rambling. Here we go. So, all right. So, let me go with option. I put it as option 3 because to me, I think it's the least desirable, just personally, because it complicates it. But so let's say your inclusionary zoning kicks in at 5 units still. And from say 5 to 9 units, you have a 10% requirement. And you want to start with affordable housing units. Well, that is where we've gotten feedback that the desire is that these smaller projects don't have to go through the SHI process, right? Which is essentially it's approval through the local initiative program as local action units. And so if that is the desire, then once you hit a project that has, say, 10 or more units, and now you're getting those 2 inclusionary housing units, and that's where you can have some sort of split between affordable and workforce, whatever that split may be that you desire. You would need to, I think it's almost like it's asking for kind of multiple things here. You want the bylaw to be sufficiently strong that it lets developers know we expect that these are approved as local action units, but we don't expect that for lower thresholds. So how can you do that with, if you're not saying something that gives the board the ability to waive that? Well, you could put in something specific. You could say, once a project triggers 2 inclusionary housing units, it's expected that affordable housing units count on the SHI. But then what that's creating is, so let's say in this hypothetical project here, if you create, say, a 5-unit project that triggers 1 inclusionary housing unit, and you want that to be affordable for purposes of this talk and for purposes of the bylaw, that means 80%, okay? Well, you've said that you don't want that to be on the SHI. So for that 80% unit, you'd have some sort of local agreement. Then once you're at a bigger project type, let's say 10 units, now you want that SHI eligibility to kick in. So now you have an affordable unit that needs to go through LIP. and you have a workforce unit, which is also local. So essentially, it's understanding that there's kind of 3 different unit types that could arise out of this bylaw: local restriction affordable, SHI affordable, and local restriction workforce. That's
Alexis, yeah, okay, go ahead.
that's all. I mean, I would love a more simple way to do this, and I still think the simplest way is to say the
but I-
board may waive it.
I think the goal, well, we've been trying to look at those projects of 2 units or less. And the issue of being on the SHI is really more, we don't think developers have the capacity to do the whole ball of wax in terms of the regulation. So
Mhm.
the goal was to remove all the regulatory burden while still getting a deed restriction. But
Mhm.
that wasn't a policy goal that said, and they should be affordable or they shouldn't be. I mean, we're using affordable, meaning it's just affordable for the people who live here, regardless of whether it's on the SHI.
Mhm.
Because we have 30%, according to the census, 32% of the people in this town earn less than 80% of the AMI. So it's not an insubstantial group of people. And then there's another group that fit into the affordable. So I think you're conflating affordability and SHI. We
Mhm.
were sort of at the point of anything, small units, we really didn't care. And we hadn't finalized that line about where small units are. But that was a different conversation of whether we, even within those small units, would there be some affordability and some workforce?
Mhm. Understood. So then a couple ways to think about that then. So you're saying when you use the term affordable, it sounds to me like you're saying you mean relatively affordable, not 80% affordable.
No, we were talking about 80% affordable. I mean,
Okay.
that's what originally, I mean, I'm just saying what we were, but talking. So, yeah. No, we're capital A affordable and attainable housing.
Yep.
We were trying to alternate by having both of those.
Understood.
I think maybe we're going in circles with our definitions. We have affordable capital A, which means it's on SHI and has to follow all the lit requirements. And then we have,
It doesn't have to. I mean, we could require affordable and not be on the HSI. That's the whole
Right.
basis of this.
that's where
Yeah,
I was gonna go.
yeah,
So there's capital A and there's little a.
Yeah.
And then there's workforce.
no.
Right.
Attainable, well,
Attainable.
attainable and workforce are,
This is the, there's capital A, affordable,
Which means 80%
right?
and unlit on SHI.
it doesn't have.
If we want,
That's the capital A she's referring to.
That's the
Small
capital A.
A is what you're referring to.
we could make it both.
You could make it.
We could say, we want to create units that are 80% or below and go on the SHI.
Right.
We could also say we want to create units that are 80% below and we don't care about the SHI. We have some local agreement that we're comfortable with.
Right.
And then we can create units that are just
Between
over
80%.
80 and 120% workforce.
Right.
And those would have some local
Yes.
agreement.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing.
Right, those are
Right.
all options, but we, right now, our bylaw.
Right.
Only have any affordable unit, 80% or above, 80% or below, has to go on the SHI.
Right.
Mhm.
So you're either doing that. And you have to do that. At minimum, and then if you have more than one unit, you could
So
do a workforce.
I think I can say this. I think the consensus, listening to the discussion around the table over the last couple of meetings, is that we want the 3 categories. We want affordable on SHI. We want
Okay.
affordable, not required to be on SHI. And we want workforce, which is something between 80 and 120%.
Are we gonna talk, are we
Is-
calling attainable and workforce, are they the same thing, so it's all around terms?
Yeah.
Interchange
Yeah.
there.
I would refrain from attainable. I
Okay,
think just when we're saying anything that's not deed restricted on the SHI. It would be a workforce
Right.
unit that's above 80%, 80 to 120%.
80 to 120.
Is a workforce unit. And I think what Alexis was going through here was just that having all those categories makes it confusing and
Right.
makes it harder to implement the bylaw. Whereas what these options are showing is if we want to get out from under making the developer go through all the SHI lip requirements. We could simply just say that first unit is gonna be workforce unit.
Right, that's all.
But why couldn't that be an affordable unit and not be on the SHI?
Well, the issue is that you have to provide for that somehow in the bylaw. And that would mean if you could either remove any language from the SHI at all from your bylaw, like the city of Boston's inclusionary housing ordinance doesn't even reference the SHI. Because they want that ability to do it, through, I assume they have maybe inclusionary zoning policies or something like that where they get into that. But the zoning itself doesn't even talk about that. But in my understanding from conversations and whatnot is that you still want the zoning to tie certain projects to that because you expect it over, at a certain threshold where it's reasonable. And so if you want it in the zoning, but you don't want it to apply to smaller projects, that has to be provided for somehow. Unless you're just going to have a general statement about the board's ability to waive requirements. So
I still don't, I don't mean to be dense here. I'm just trying to understand. Right now, it triggers at the 5th unit, you have to do an affordable. At the 10th unit, you do workforce, and then it alternates. So we're saying those first 2 units, we think it was burdensome to go through all the hoops of SHI. So those first 2 units, one affordable, one workforce, if those were excluded, they could just be deed restricted. That's where we started. So I don't know why we still couldn't have an affordable unit under that category.
you could, you could.
That's not what we have
Not
now.
on SHI. We could make it so that first, a 5-unit project and you're only creating one inclusionary unit. That one inclusionary unit could be 80% or below, but not
Not on SHI,
and it's just
And
our
then-
own local
our own local.
template for what we want.
And
for-
the 9th unit, would have another unit, and that would be workforce. And then, I'm just saying, we staggered this so it was every other, regardless of the SHI issue. So I don't know why I'm trying to understand the complication there or the barrier to that existing structure.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's a complication. It's just something to be aware of. If you want that SHI eligibility provided for in your zoning at a certain point, if you want that in your zoning, then you need to say that explicitly. That's all. And so then you have to have a marker at some point where you say this, at this threshold, the affordable housing units will be required for the SHI, for inclusion on the SHI. That's all, and that's okay.
I think the group, we haven't sort of decided what that marker is, but I think that's right. Here's my big picture concern. We've been doing a lot of zoning, like DCPC, top of the shop, where 4 or 5 units are gonna be up there, and, only 4% of the land in town is undeveloped, so it's a pretty built-out town, and when you think of some of the places that might come up, we don't have spaces where there's going to be 40, 50, 60 units. I mean, we are going to be a town of a lot of redevelopment where you get 5 to 10 units, 5 to 15. We're going to have a lot of 5 to 10 unit developments. And my concern about some of this is none of them there'll be no requirement to have affordability as we build out this town if we're excluding the affordable. Because no developer's going to say, I can build a workforce or I can build a capital A affordable unless they're a nonprofit with a mission.
Well, it seems like where the issue came up was in the recent project that we had where it's 5 units, I forget the exact number of campus issues, but 5 units. And so that triggered one SHI unit. Okay. And the administrative burden of doing one SHI unit was
25 minutes.
yeah, it's a lot.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we agree.
So if we make we need in the town, we need capital A affordable 80% units desperately. But we also need workforce units desperately. And I guess I don't see a reason why if we want to solve that issue, why we don't just say under 10, there's a requirement from 5 to 9, you have to have an extra unit, but it can be workforce. It doesn't have to be capital A. I think that's fine.
Well, the first one would be capital A and the second one would be workforce. So you're saying,
I'm saying start the first one at workforce.
well, my concern there is, I think a vast majority of our development going forward is going to be in projects of 10 and under, and you're gonna be excluding,
Right.
you're not gonna be incentivizing that affordable. I mean,
Or it'd be 50/50 at 10 units, at 2, 1 capital A affordable.
well, that's
At the
not what
second.
people are saying right now.
Or they cut it off 9, so they don't have to
The
go to.
major thing is to get rid of the SHI for the
Right.
one.
Yeah,
So we can have, so if you're doing 5 to 9 units, your project is 5 to 9
So it's
units.
just have a link grant.
It's like
Not trying to hover.
one of those units has to be restricted to 80%. Yeah, however it comes out. If you're doing just one, that one has to be
Right.
80% or below, doesn't have to be on the SHI. So you don't have to do the marketing plan. What this goes back to, the landlord, whoever's doing it is still gonna have to follow for themselves. It's fair housing law and non-discrimination, all that stuff, but we're not involved in that.
Right.
So we're not making them do a tenant selection. We're not making them do
A lottery.
the lottery, all that stuff, because that's what's required for the SHI. We're just saying we're gonna come up with our own simplified local regulatory agreement that's be vetted by town council. We'll have that as our boilerplate. That's what will get signed and monitored.
Right.
If you're in that band and you're gonna create 2, the first one's gotta be non-SHI, 80% or below, and then if you want, you can make the other one workforce. Or if you wanna make both of them 80% or below, non-SHI, you can do that, but if you wanna have one workforce, one.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Is the workforce always gonna be optional then, all the way up the chart?
I think it's always like the way it's worded in your current bylaw where it says like at least 50% must be. I mean, the implication is that it's optional, that it's workforce, because it's like, you know, a maximum of 50% workforce, a minimum of 50% AHUs, right? So I think it's kind of implied optional, but otherwise you're doing it affordable.
And as Carolyn just mentioned, we have 2 crises going on. We have the affordability crisis for the 80%. We have the work, and if we do it this way, we might not be addressing the 80 to 20% of the workforce housing. There's no requirement to do workforce housing, because they could say, well, I'm already spending the money to go through the list. I'm already starting a lottery. Why am I gonna bother having 2 types of
No,
things?
no, they will,
Huh?
I've looked at a million.
But we're not requiring them to.
We're not requiring, believe me, economics is required. They're gonna try to do as few affordables as possible, because
It's their operating cost.
their income, their cash flow increases. So
So
they,
that's what we assume.
oh, no, but.
There's no harm in saying if you're doing 4, 2 have to be affordable, 2 have to be workforce.
I'm saying
Why not
we have
just
the
say-
problem, we potentially we could skip the middle is what we're getting at. So the lost middle of the people that are,
Well, we get
Again.
them in here for 50% of any new development.
no, we don't. Somebody could choose to go of all affordable. I know, but I'm just saying, if
That would be the
we're,
first one in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
well, but we're cracking this open.
I know, I'm just-
Trying to get support throughout the town to pass this at town meeting. And someone asked us, how are we addressing, the workforce people? How does it specifically deal with, me and my kids? And we're saying, well, the developers will create that because of the burden, because of the overhead, doing it the other way, it's less overhead or more profitable. If we've cracked this open, I don't see why we just don't say what we really need is workforce housing as well as affordable housing.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out language and garnering support from the town, where instead of saying, we're gonna assume that the market is going to protect for your workforce housing, which it is. But we're gonna assume that rather than we're gonna explicitly protect workforce housing by requiring it. Developers are gonna say, thanks for requiring 50%, I was gonna do that anyway. but I think what I'm hearing you say is in terms of sort of public buy-in, being explicit that we are providing for workforce housing, not assuming that it'll happen.
Is there any
Exactly.
reason to not do that?
No, I mean, if we're talking about a language change to make it explicit, I mean, again, I don't think this is gonna happen, but I mean, that's fine.
That 50% are required. 50% workforce is a requirement, not an option.
Mm.
Am I getting that backwards?
Yeah, why wouldn't we do it that way?
Right now, we're requiring 50% affordable. If we're saying we're requiring 50-50 explicitly. Or
Mm.
60-40 or.
That would be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be fine.
On those larger projects.
And I just think in terms of where the cutoff is, I think, and when we started this by saying there's gonna be projects with 1 or 2 units. And can we get out from under the burden? So I think we've
Right.
kind of we've stepped back a little bit, because if you had 9 units, we've gone back from 20% to 10%. Alexis, can you talk about where you came
Yeah.
up with some of the percentages?
Yeah, sure. And I also just want to say that, I mean, this is all adjustable, customizable. There's no, some of it is just for purposes of, showing how it could play out. When you have because your current bylaw specified directly how many units would be, if you have this many units, this is how many workforce, or affordable or anything. Rather than when you have it as a percentage and you have the ability for the fractional units to round up, in theory, it ends up playing out as a higher threshold anyway. You could bring this down. You could say, we could play with the numbers, have it be 15%. Straight through if you want. It doesn't really matter. I just think that at some point the requirement that would then trigger that 2 are required at 5, and then that's overly cumbersome. So it's a little bit of an art form. And I think if you look at the examples of the other communities, that can kind of allow you to decide what you're comfortable with. But ultimately, there's no answer that's going without doing kind of a really kind of robust feasibility analysis. I mean, you're not going to have an answer that directly tells the story of Eastham for you, I think. And that's a bit, there's a lot of factors that go in there. So this can totally be adjusted and played with. I do just want to circle back though, I think, to the issue, because I started this saying that I put option 3 as my non-preferred, but based on what I'm hearing, I think if it's your preferred, that's what matters, right? And because what option 3 does is it simply, it has your affordable, that is, and again, we can change that to say it must be, that the 50% must be the workforce, to the comment about we want to make sure that there's a base of that being required, not just allowed. So that's fine. But the point here is that if you have language where there's an affordable unit that kicks in at, say, a 5-unit project, then if you want the zoning to robustly require SHI eligibility for bigger projects, that's where you might need to have language that clarifies and says, for any project creating 2 or more inclusionary housing units, an AHU shall qualify for inclusion on the town's Chapter 40B subsidized housing inventory. Otherwise, I don't know how you would do that unless you just removed the SHI from the zoning altogether and said, refer to the town's inclusionary housing policy, where you could, that would be easier to update than update your zoning, where you could make those specifications, as I know some communities do. They don't talk about the SHI in the zoning at all.
I think last time there was thought that if you were doing a development that had 10 or more units, that you're probably a developer who has the wherewithal and to handle doing that. And, the SHI requirement, that's going to be factored into your pro forma, so that even if you are only creating 1 or 2 units out of 10, you can absorb that. As opposed to anything below 10 and you're creating 1 or 2, depending on the percentage, those would be the non-SHI. And then if you want to have that 50%, so whatever it is, creating 5 units and you got to do 2 inclusionary, 1 has to be non-SHI affordable, one has to be
Non-SHI.
non-SH workforce housing, which is non-SHI.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. We could make that so that it's mandatory. You gotta do one of each.
So I just want to, for comparison's sake here, I just want to show you, so going back to, because there was a comment about how your current zoning requires 2 units at 9, and under this formula, it would yield 1. I mean, you could make that 15% shift happen earlier if you want, but I just think the percentage is a clearer way to go than having a big, long chart that doesn't inherently provide the ability to figure out fractional, which matters for purposes of the fee in lieu of. That's where so right now, because your bylaw says, you know, this, if you produce this many units, this is how many inclusionary housing units you have to include. There really, in effect, there then isn't any fractional thing that would happen. And that translates well to the fee in lieu of, because what you have the ability to do is a developer may say, so say, for example, if I'm a developer and I'm doing a 10-unit project, but I only want to include 1 affordable unit. If you have it tied to a percentage that generates fractions, they could provide 1 affordable unit and 50% of whatever your fee in lieu of is. So that's why it's helpful to have the percentage that generates fractional units instead of explicitly telling this many units, this is how many inclusionary you give. So I do just want to, but like, you know, in theory, the way it all shakes out, like if you just, you could adjust it if you're really kind of want to stick to the way it all worked out. So what I'm going to compare here is right now under your zoning, 5-unit project would generate 1 inclusionary. So the differences here happen at 9 units. And then, actually, I'm going to even close this more. I want it to be compared to this. Okay, so it happens at 9 units, 333. Ooh, you actually end up more with the formula basis than you, oh no, I lied. Sorry, 4 units. Yeah, so just kind of understanding, seeing how it shakes out. I mean, and then you can adjust your, you know, but I think at some point you need to remove yourself from what the zoning currently says if you want to have the benefits that other ways of approaching it give, such as creating fractional units, which has its own benefits. And then here, yeah, 5 gets triggered earlier here. You could change the percentages though.
Alexis,
Mhm.
your first example here, where at 9 units.
Yep.
When I was first reading your thing, I thought, oh, that's only, you know, 10% of 9. I just thought it was going to be a rounding up, but you're saying, no, it's not a rounding up.
Yes, it is.
Rounds up.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So you can see here, so like the way in the draft bylaw, it suggests that it suggests a percentage, and then there's a resulting fractional result, and all fractional units round up to the next whole number. So for 5 to 9, you know, you end up with a fractional unit, it rounds up. So what you could do if you really still wanted 9 to trigger 2 units, I mean, you could change the percentage. You could say that 15% kicks in at 9-unit projects instead. I mean, you can play with it. It's not like it's not something that is, necessarily needs to be rigid the way we just needed to put a number in, because you have to have something. You have to have some framework. And so I think, yes, there may be certain project triggers where you lose a unit with this method. Your options then are either to increase the percentage, but understand that may make some projects infeasible, or to, stick with the approach you have, which doesn't give you the fractional unit benefit. And I do see it as a benefit.
I think just to get some decision points in here, our bylaw has an option for fee in lieu of.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing from Alexis is that our bylaw actually doesn't work. We have it, but it doesn't work because we don't have the fractional. So if we want to keep fee in lieu of, like we have to have this fractional piece in place.
And then that fraction could be a dollar amount that goes in.
Right, because that's how you figure out what the
So
fee is.
payment.
Right now, if someone came in with our bylaw, fee in lieu, we don't have a way to like compute that.
Where does the fee go?
I think right now it says the housing trust.
Okay, so I think just one decision point I think we have to
Vacation.
figure out now is, do we want to go with the fractional? And the answer to that, I think, is yes, if we want to also have fee in lieu of. And we can figure out we can still play with the numbers like Alexis was saying, but I think that's one decision I think we have to.
And I would start the percentage, the 10% at 1. And in other words, if someone's building 2 units, 10%, we would like to be affordable. That's below the fractional of 1. Okay. Well, if you rounded it up, it would be. But anyway, what some of the other bylaws do is that in that 1 to 5 category, before the percentages kick in, that there is an inclusionary fee that they pay. That's a percentage of the fractional value of the unit.
Yeah, I think it usually kicks in at 2. Like I think Provincetown, for example, kicks in maybe at 2. I mean,
Two.
One
One would be every single family.
No, is it 2 units being built or 2?
2 units being built total.
So if 2 are built, 1 has to be.
No, 2 units being built, so
10%.
10% of
It's a,
2 is 0.2 times whatever the value is, that would be the value of the one unit.
But we're talking about rounding up, so 0.2 would round up to 1.
No, but
Maybe in
so
the 25 it doesn't round
you're
up.
talking about if you're
But-
building 3 units or 4
So,
units.
so what
You're
I'm,
not
I
gonna
think,
acquire
so
the quarterly unit.
2, 3, 4
fraction
unit
dollars.
Four.
based on-
have to give a
50.
percentage-based fee to the Affordable Housing Trust,
Yes,
but they do not have to include a unit.
correct.
And how does the value get determined? How does?
so
it-
that's another discussion point. I mean, I will say this is where, sorry.
Alexa, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think just understanding the more you drop it down, you do also run the risk of just disincentivizing anything other than single family home development, because so again, if the intent of the bylaw is to diversify housing types, it's like a balancing act. I don't have the answer for you, but there is a risk also of bringing it down too much. It may be worth, talking to Provincetown, see how it's going. Look at the towns that have lower thresholds within the examples that we laid out. Because in that summary we did of the inclusionary zoning across the Cape, there's no analysis of how it's played out. There's no analysis of is this successful or not. So I think that is maybe a worthwhile thing. Is there a point at which it's creating too much of, it's going to disincentivize development. I don't know what that answer is, but I do just want to put that out there. What would happen, as I heard, I'm sorry, I don't know everybody's names, but I did hear someone comment that the result then is with these smaller developments, they're not going to provide an affordable unit. They're going to pay into the Affordable Housing Trust, and what that fee is generated from. We did keep that in your bylaw. I can shift back over to there, but just to kind of close out the thought on the unit breakdown. Maybe we look a little bit more at the percentages and the thresholds, and maybe, unless, and again, don't need an answer right now from town council, of course, but I think it would be, because this is one of the issues that we want to make sure is, we're not causing any problems here, that if you go with something like option 3, just having some kind of threshold, a project over this size, the affordable housing unit, because you have to define these things too. So I think that's the other issue of, talking about lowercase a, capital A, you have to have a term for what an affordable housing unit means. So then having some language in about, this is the trigger point for when the town's going to expect that the project is eligible for the SHI. I think the open question points there are what the percentages and thresholds are going to be, which we, can come back to. And then if there's any concern about having an explicit distinction that there's a threshold where SHI eligibility is expected, because the implication is that it's not expected below that. So is that all kind of good for percolating and moving on to the fee in lieu of?
We can move on. I want to just throw an idea out. We don't have to debate it right now. We'll come back to this. The only thing I'm comfortable with the fractional, but I'm uncomfortable with waiting till 10 to trigger. I think a lot of our projects are gonna be 10 units or less. I'd like to have at least two units. Now, here's the other thing that would make a lot of people in town happy probably, is I'm wondering, since seasonal communities has allowed the workforce element to go up to 200% of AMI, if we were to maintain the 50-50 here, so we're addressing that 50% of the people who are below 80, but do we give more expansion on the workforce side so that the public workers, the cops, that constituency has a better shot? But again, it's raising that level, and I'm looking at you, Carolyn, because it's your bandwidth.
I think we should
Just think about it.
we should think about it
Yeah.
and look at the table of what that means in reality. 200% is actually a pretty significant income.
Yeah.
Okay,
And I don't think, personally, I don't, yeah.
I threw it out because that's what the seasonal communities allows.
Several with the programs up to 200%. But when we're talking about creating units for housing, I'm not sure that 200%.
Okay, and maybe it's
And
something,
do we need that? Do we need to go to 200%?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think we should look at it, but before we make a decision on that, what does 200% get us? Or do we need 150% or 162%, whatever it is, based on what the typical salaries are that they need. Board that, it's gonna be based on.
yeah, that's not,
Yeah.
I just think.
That's why I wanted to mention, I like your idea of maybe starting this at 2 or 3. I'm thinking 3. Thinking back to the problem we were talking about in an earlier meeting where the developers were reluctant to go to 5 because it triggered the requirement. If you started at some lower number, they're not going to be reluctant. But, they're going to do a fee in lieu of, but that barrier is not there anymore. If they're doing 3 or more, they got to do something.
All right, so Alexis, you have wanted to move on for a while.
Oh, no, this is very helpful. I'm happy to take it at your pace. I'm not, but the question of the fees in lieu of came up.
Yep.
So I don't recall, I'd have to look back. I'm not sure if, I don't think in our summary we did a deep dive into how the communities approach fee in lieu of. It would be something helpful to look into. But the typical way is that a fee in lieu of is determined is kind of based on what are the actual costs of creating an affordable unit, which requires kind of consistent analysis, or you could put it on the developer to show what that cost would be. But, again, that is one approach. The other approach that is commonly used is kind of the affordability gap approach, which is what your bylaw currently has, which is, and this is our update. This is not your current bylaw. Although I don't think we changed the language much here. I'd have to go back and look. But basically what it's saying is what is the value of a market rate kind of equivalent unit, meaning by bedroom size is typically, I would keep it simple to bedrooms and ownership versus, single family versus condo. There's a million ways you could slice it, but you're going to complicate it. So looking at kind of the average, it could be assessed value or it could be median sale price or something. I think there's different ways we could talk about that. In your current zoning, the tricky part was it said the difference between market rate units and affordable in the project. The only problem with that is that you can't necessarily do that if the project is all rental, because that just makes it a little trickier. So typically, if you are looking at kind of whether it's median sale prices for similar units or average assessed value, which the assessor can help with, based on things like bedroom and unit type, the difference between that and what an affordable unit would cost, that is your fee in lieu of. Offhand, I'm not sure what that would be because I don't know what the average assessed value is. I mean, I can tell you it's pretty easy to figure out what the average assessed value is of your single family homes and your condos, but breaking it down by bedroom, I don't have that data. You'd need kind of help from your assessor to figure that out. But figuring out what that difference is a common approach. Currently, your zoning says for ownership or rental projects, we suggested just keeping that to ownership, and only because the equivalent, it doesn't always quite work the same for rental projects. But in retrospect, as I'm talking, I'm wondering if it makes sense to simplify it and just say, you know, for any project, you can simplify it and just say that's what the fee in lieu of is based on. If a developer, maybe you give an applicant the ability to show for a rental project why that is an exorbitant expectation, which would then be on them to show kind of the per unit cost for a market rate versus an affordable, which really would boil down to the difference in rent that they would be getting if it's a rental, and over X amount of, you know, period of time. But there's also costs associated with an affordable unit that aren't associated with a market rate unit that I personally wouldn't be able to, like, you need an applicant to help you with that. And that's the things like, you know, if they're requiring a wait list, annual income certifications, these costs that developers incur for managing the affordable unit. So you could make it on them to show why for a rental project, you know, the fee in lieu of that the town has calculated, they could propose a different one, I guess. So that would be my suggestion, is if you want to stick with that kind of affordability gap approach, is it needs to be based on some consistent data point that year after year can be updated. I think right now we have the language, the affordable sale prices and affordable sale, the proposed sale prices. And we suggest the assessment prices for units currently in the community, because I think that data is easier to get. You can just go to your assessor than the sale data. The assessor probably could help with that because they do have the sale. I just think that's a much bigger ask, I guess, to get the capturing the sales data as opposed to assessed value.
Alexa, Alexis and Carolyn too. You mentioned earlier the ability to take some of these provisions and have the principle in the bylaw, but have the mechanics and procedures so that as we get some experience, we don't have to keep changing the bylaw. And this might be an example of something like that, where we say that there's a fee in lieu of, and as defined by XYZ procedures or document something. So that not the specifics are not spelled out in the bylaw itself. The more we can do that, the less we're going to have to go back and tweak and tweak and tweak. But it still gives us the ability to be flexible over time to the marketplace and to what the developers are facing and what's happening. So, Carolyn, do you have any problem with doing some of that? From a legal perspective?
I don't. I don't. I think we could put something in. I don't know that I would necessarily say a policy, but I think we could certainly empower, whether it is the planning board or whomever, to ultimately promulgate some regulations around this, and then be built into your regulations as opposed to the bylaw, so that you have a little more flexibility in changing the fee in lieu of when market conditions change, as opposed to coming back to town meeting.
As an example, Carolyn, could we look at the past 12 months of the average selling price per bedroom? So if it's a 3-bedroom house, so now we have an average selling price per bedroom, let's say running average, and just apply that. So if someone's building we look at how many 3-bedroom how many houses sold, figure out how many bedrooms they had, and then apply that on a per bedroom basis to the new development. And that number is always changing. So your fee is based on what the market was for the past year. If you have a 2-bedroom unit, because you get into this idea of the market value of what they're building determines how much their contribution is, as opposed to the market rate of how expensive it is in town and how expensive it is for the housing trust to go out and get that housing in lieu of. Because that's what we're trying to do, is create housing.
Well, I would suggest that this discussion, if we can we put the principle in the bylaw, and then we put the formulas and in regulations, we don't have to decide the answer to that question right now.
I think maybe there's a middle ground. We probably want to codify something. To leave it wide open, that it's like an open negotiation.
No, I don't mean.
Well, I wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting open negotiation, but I think we just need to be careful about if we're doing formula driven things based on assessments and medians and averages.
No, yeah,
I was gonna say, I said sales.
Yeah,
For
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
That would be the most relevant thing.
It would be. It's just, yeah, a question of the availability of the data on a regular basis,
can you
but
really get the reliable data on that routinely and
We're living in an artificial intelligence world. I can ask,
This should be easy.
I can ask AI, or Bob Sheldon, or the other.
yeah.
can I give one comment on that?
yes,
The theory's true.
Sorry, I do think, I'm thinking of all the data that I know the assessor has. I do think because they get the data of, sales transactions too. So I do theoretically wonder if the assessor could help pull filtering down sales for this year, single family home or condo, bedroom, I think that, I don't want to make a promise, but I think that may be a doable task even via the assessor if you wanted to go with sales as opposed to assessed value. But that'd be a good question for the assessor, unless you have, some other regular data.
Sales. Price is more relevant.
what, I'm a little concerned about time. Alexis, what are the other main things you wanted to, we've talked about,
Sure.
what are some of the main decision points we should?
Yep. Super quick. I think anything that's highlighted in yellow just keeps referring to me saying it'd be so great to have some guidelines to refer to. So we don't need to worry about that. I think the only other piece that I wanted to ask about is we actually did still keep in the section about marketing and resident selection, the applicant still needing to explain how they're going to market, whether it's lowercase affordable, uppercase, workforce. We do still think that, for the town to feel good, about the encouraging equal access to these opportunities that you are providing via your zoning. But this is not specifying anything about a lottery. It's not saying anything about that. It's just saying they need to give some sort of plan that explains how they're going to market the units and how they're going to, the kind of their fair resident selection process. And then with the understanding, and maybe this could be clarified somehow, for any units that are subsidized by under LIP, understanding that it would need to conform to EOHLC requirements in that instance. But as of right now, we do still think that's good. But I'm also hearing feedback that came up with an earlier topic that maybe it's not the town's responsibility to care, not to care, but to not have to review that. So if that, I think, maybe is a thought bubble to keep thinking on. Do you want to require, even for lowercase a affordable housing, like a 5-unit project that's just going to be subject to a town restriction? Do you still want the applicant to, even if it's just giving some statement confirming that they're going to? It's up to you, but we have that in there currently. And then the only other pieces, I believe, the one thing, this is more, town council would love your thought on this piece as well. Another thing that we've seen a lot when communities have inclusionary zoning that creates SHI eligible housing and non-SHI eligible housing, it almost, I think, makes it much simpler for the community if the local restrictions are similarly based on the LIP regulatory agreement and the LIP deed rider for ownership units, because then the applicant and staff and town council, everybody, you're not seeing these two entirely different sets of restrictions. And so I don't know, again, don't need an answer right now, but right now we did say, we suggest that it be consistent with the forms approved for LIP, but I don't know if you think maybe we don't need to go into that much detail. Essentially, I just think it's really important for the applicant, because this is kind of what happened with the current smaller project, is they need to understand when it is SHI eligible. You don't have a choice. You're using EOHLC's regulatory agreement. So making sure that that's clear in here. And I think that's it. Those are our kind of final questions and thoughts before you have time all to really take a look at it.
And don't forget, we need to talk about incentives. Okay, not just the required number of units, but are there some incentives we can put in?
I think the incentives come into play in the other parts of the bylaw.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, not in,
Talking about that, but
yeah,
yes.
see. In case.
So the. I guess I want to give Alexis some guidance because we gotta start wrapping up the final document. So we have consensus on the use of the change of the chart so we can have the benefit of the fractional unit, which will make sense with the fees in lieu because we still want to keep that as an option. Do we need to have more discussion on where that threshold is, the percentage?
Two.
Yep.
I don't agree. I think you're putting if you're going as low as 2, you're really gonna, that's a direct tax on somebody who wants to build a duplex in town. I think you're gonna basically make that never happen.
Not not 2 units. Two units at 10, or are you saying?
The fee in lieu of.
Oh, the fan load, yeah, I'm a little concerned about that, but.
So between 2 and 4. The fee in lieu of. Would apply, is what I propose, between 2 and 4 units being built. Fee in lieu of would apply at 10%.
That's a direct 10% tax on somebody who wants to build a duplex. So.
Yeah.
Building a duplex in this town would cost about $1.5 million or $1 million to build a duplex, 500,000 a unit. And you just, who's gonna build a duplex? Not gonna happen. You know, the idea is we're going after developers and we're looking for people that have, a lot of units to spread the cost out. And we felt that 5 was sort of tough, and that's why we opened up this discussion about saying that 5th unit, we don't want people to build 4 and avoid the 5th. Now, when you're asking for it exasperates, that goes the other direction.
I think you're right.
Is there a downside to starting it at 3? So in other words, allow duplexes without if you do a larger development, 3, 4, 5.
I don't know what the hard number is, but it's a sort of a general rule of thumb. When you're less than 5, the cost per unit goes beyond, in many cases, what the developers are willing to do.
So
They'll just do single families.
The cost per unit.
I like the idea that we're no longer a step function, that, at 1, you've got this
Yep.
big number, and then at 9 or 10, it hits you again. I'm definitely in favor of saying I was espousing this to my wife maybe last night. It should be stepped all the way, that unit 11, 12, 13, 14, all should have an incurring cost until you build that other unit, and then that house money goes to help us renovate some of the housing we already have in town that we don't have online.
And doing a fractional, I guess, provides that, right?
The fractional stuff, yeah, I'm in favor of doing the
Yeah.
fractional stuff. Starting at
What do you say?
5.
I mean, instead of rounding up.
That's the fractional is what determines what
The
it's.
fractional ties to your fee in lieu of.
Right.
And then, so the only thing I'm in agreement with the fractional, I would. Tom, to your point, we got to 5 and above, started triggering this because we looked at a whole bunch of inclusionary zoning. And that was actually the most aggressive one we saw. We hadn't seen one any lower than that. And given the housing crisis we had, we sort of went out with that. But to Kevin's point, I think, we haven't seen it maybe because of the economics, but
now a lot of them are at 2. Provincetown's at 2.
oh, yeah.
Barnstable's at 2.
Yeah. At what point does the fee in lieu of tip over between I'll just pay the fee versus I'm going to put in the housing unit? Do we know that from an economic standpoint?
Well, a related question to that, if we're stripping out all the regulations, one of the regulations under the LIP program I always understood was you couldn't build your affordable unit at any lesser quality than your market rate unit. So do we need to have that provision in there that we're not getting 4 market rate units and then suddenly we get a kind of a really low end unit.
We always have that.
Yep, minimum.
Yeah, you
design
still have that.
standards.
We still have that.
We have the
Okay.
features, accessibility is here,
Okay.
but what's not here is the actual cost. And in some cases, it might be more, the fee may be more, like if someone's trying to build something that's very affordable, let's say up on Holmes Ave. And he says, oh, let me do the fee. Now he's got it on Holmes Ave, industrial area. Now his fee is gonna be based on every other house that was sold overlooking the ocean and whatnot. So there's all gonna be, I'm just taking the opposite side of my own argument. You're never gonna get that in balance. I think having the two options, the fee based on something that's townwide makes sense. And if it's too expensive, build the housing, build the unit. So.
And that depends, I guess, on the fee that's established. Right, at some
Right,
point,
right.
if we end up with,
And
So if the cost of housing is here and the fee is
Right.
here, of course, that's what they're gonna do.
all right,
But in a situation that he's describing, it could be the opposite. So
Right.
building a unit instead of paying, he's gonna save himself $30,000.
and the
Right.
purpose is to allow, and I keep mentioning Carolyn, sorry, but the housing trust, we're trying to enable the housing trust to create housing. The money that the housing trust needs is what the market rate is. So our fee should be based more on what the town is doing, what the market of the town is versus what that one particular project is. That's what I was.
I think that's right. And depending on the data set that we use, the fee will almost always be on some historical data.
Yeah, if it's set on January 1st or something like that, or something.
Right, but in October, the cost of building that unit is 10%. Right,
I think
but that's just the natural rhythm of the way things are. That's okay.
No, yeah, if we want to keep talking, I think we can do that. I just want to leave off with Alexis, like,
Yes.
Okay.
what do we need Alexis to do to get us a final draft? Because we have to make a decision on going forward, so. What else do we need Alexis to do
Was
next, to kind of wrap up the draft that we can decide on?
well, I mean, do we want to try to conclude all the points here or do we need more? I think we need more discussion.
Yeah,
We need, yeah, we'll
Alright,
give,
we're not ready for
yeah,
that.
we're not ready. I don't think.
right.
You think we're ready to just,
No, I haven't read it yet, so.
I think we need to, there's a lot here.
Just digest it.
yeah,
No, I meant,
It's less than a day.
no, I didn't mean that we decide, is there more information
Oh, okay.
for next discussion?
I think that's.
Are any other towns?
No.
Right.
Could I add one thing to one of Alexa's questions that was really just posed to me? As far as local, like local regulatory agreement and kind of matching that up state requirements. We do that now in the 40B context, kind of as a belt and suspenders approach. We always throw into a decision that in the event that the subsidizing agency ceases to exist or the regulatory agreement ceases to exist, we then have like a local regulatory agreement that would kick in with some of the same requirements.
Yeah.
So if the board does want to require that for these non-SHI eligible housing units, that there's still going to be some kind of structure in place to make sure that, like you were just saying earlier, what's your marketing plan? Okay, maybe it doesn't have to be something that's approved by EOHLC, but you're going to tell us that you're going to do non-SHI affordable housing or even for workforce housing. Well, if you're going to advertise in the Worcester Gazette, for example, I'm not so sure that you're reaching our targeted audience in Eastham. So we're going to want to see a marketing plan, maybe even some form of a monitoring agent who says, yes, you are doing exactly what you said you were going to do. But to answer your question, if you are concerned about building into the bylaw some kind of local regulatory agreement that makes sure that for the non-SHI eligible units that there is someone keeping them accountable and a document that would include all of that, I think we could easily modify what we use in the 40B context right now. So if that helps for future drafting, just want you to know that.
Okay. Thank you.
okay. You wanna wrap and then we'll take a bathroom break and then we'll see where we can try to.
Are we still talking about inclusionary or are we? We won't, do we need Alexis and Carolyn to stay with us or be more discussion amongst ourselves?
I think Alexis has given us enough for right now.
But apparently Carolyn has not.
In a good way.
Just hang it, Alexis.
So we're gonna,
That's funny.
so we need to digest this a little bit more.
Yep,
And we're gonna have to give you-
understood.
We will have to give you direction. And do that.
Come to some resolution.
Resolution, yep, okay,
That
thank
sounds good.
you.
All right, thank you so much. All right.
Carolyn, it's always
Thank you,
good to see you.
Bye.
Thank you, Rachel.
So are you-
Bye.
She's,
No.
is Rachel really there? She's right there.
I'm really here.
Just, I wasn't.
I am really here.
That way when Jack and I go upstairs, then we can say, what did we miss, so Rachel?
What's to call her Alexis all day?
I've been listening this whole time. Don't worry.
Okay.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Just reach out, Paul, when you have feedback, and we'll make those changes. But thanks everybody for a great discussion.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Do you folks need me for this or?
Do we need Carolyn? I don't know, we need to keep, we gotta talk a little.
Yeah, I
bit.
think we're still,
We're still
yeah.
debating things, Carolyn, so maybe Paul can just follow up if we get on the road legally is a problem.
Okay. I'll keep you out of trouble. But if I don't chat with you guys, happy holidays, okay?
You too.
Thank you.
You too. All right,
Thank you for bringing this.
I had to take a bathroom break.
Yeah.
So there's one, and that's 5 minutes, which leaves us 10 minutes. So we need to think about what we want to do and think about we have to talk about schedule. And I don't know what's people's hard stops right now.
I've got a busy after they tell me. I'm gonna Zoom call back to my house.
But you're gonna had a math plan. I'm never like,
You-
I just said you had a math plan.
So Kevin, you're gonna be out of here,
Tomorrow.
you're gonna be out of here by what time? Which you really need to be out by 1?
Yeah, because
Okay.
I'm trying to fit that after that, I got nothing, so it's just.
All right,
Got some food in my mouth and things like that, so.
I think we're close, but I think we need one more discussion on inclusionary and the site, I mean, I think we probably need another hour.
Real close.
I think we're real close. One of the things I was
Straw poll?
huh?
I mean, we're really talking about the truck. Do we just need a straw poll? Or people need time to really think about it.
Is there any option for a Zoom call later this week? Is there any option for that? I'm just
Oh,
thinking,
yeah, I'm free, I'm not that overbooked.
next week I'm in Boston all week. It'll just make it a little harder. I'm thinking that. And Jackie and. So I don't know, what do we think? Do we want to try a Zoom call later this week?
Parents, Thursday, Friday, okay,
Oh, you're off, Kate.
chasing night,
Is an evening off?
little children.
I'm doing that, can do it Monday and Tuesday.
Or they'll be chasing me probably.
Chasing you.
Is an early evening a problem?
It's all day,
Oh,
it was all day.
how old are they?
I was sitting babysitting.
Okay,
The thing about a Zoom call is, let's think about the chat, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes on a Zoom call, it's almost like there's not a good interaction, and the value of being here is that people have different views that are really important to consider.
What about
Yeah.
Wednesday, tomorrow?
Tomorrow, I have a board meeting in the afternoon, but. tomorrow
I'll say
I'm free.
no.
We would have
The
to
point
post.
is, close to 48 hours.
Good point. So the earliest we're talking is Friday, right?
22nd. Oh,
I can't do the 26th.
well, Mary can't either, right? You're out all next week.
I'm
Yeah, I'm out next week.
Kevin can't do Thursday, Friday this week. That week, and
Yeah,
tomorrow
Christmas
is
week.
blocked out.
Monday, the 29th of December. Are we back?
29th works for me.
I'm not.
I think you're,
I'm not.
You're out of town the 29th?
I'm around, not out of town.
I'm around, I don't plan on.
I'm on a plane.
You're on a plane.
Happy New Year. That's every day between here and the end of the year.
And the 30th, that Tuesday?
I can be on Zoom.
Tuesday?
I can do it. Long as-
Tuesday? The 30th, December?
Give me a second.
Give me a second.
Will they be drinking a lot? I plan on kicking off my New Year's about a week early. Get this year over with as soon as we can.
You could do it New Year's Eve and
Did you?
come with some really interesting results.
The third,
No, thank
did you, the 30th, you're just checking on Pat?
Yeah, I can't do the 30th.
Pat do it all? Do even Zoom?
What was the 29th?
20th, so Monday.
Somebody was flying.
You're flying here, training.
Oh, sure.
I could do. I could do the early evening.
I can do the 29th,
Early evening?
anytime.
Okay, Carolyn got to get to a computer, so. 5, what's early for you? 5 to 7, 5:30 to 7:30?
Plane gets in at 4:40. I'll get.
Oh, no, no.
no.
Oh, no, you're really, then we gotta meet.
It won't get
It's
in
like
at 4
6.
parties.
6.
You do it from the Uber on the way from the airport.
Doesn't matter to my butt.
Working,
Oh, we used to have a call.
do things up in
You know,
questions.
shuttle bus to the rental
You
car
know?
company.
And I'll stop asking what. 29th. From 6 to 8. Could we meet, some of us could meet here, but could we meet, and the rest could be on Zoom? And could we just like stick to like, we gotta give final direction for inclusionary and final direction for the site plan?
Yeah, I agree. What's the, I know we're running into other deadlines. What's the reason we can't wait till like January 2nd?
Well, there was another proposal I was going to make. We need to have a report done by the end of January. I am traveling out of the country between January 9th and January 24th, so there's a little bit of a problem. I'm 15 days and I can't, and I'm up in Zoom. So I was hoping that right after the first of the year, before we left on the 9th, that this, I was gonna propose this today, that this group, assuming we've got these two pieces intact, Paul and I went over, and we've got working drafts on virtually everything else. But we all, we've been looking at them forever. They all need one more eyes. And I was trying to think about whether right after the first of the year, we might do kind of a, hate to say this, like a half-day thing and take all the drafts and just like give final kind of crossing Ts and dotting Is and, so that then Paul and Jackie have a good few weeks to start writing up not only the drafts, but some of the narrative. So when we get back at the end of January, we collectively would look at everything one last time, including a report before it goes to the select board or before it becomes public, which kicks off in February. So
Thing I wanted to mention about the site coverage, we didn't really get to the. But we, Jack and I determined that we can't just tweak that
Yeah,
without opening up. So yes, one of the questions I had. Do we want to try to do all of this? I think you gotta do it all now. We think we can do that with the time allotted, or is it just we push this off till next year? Because I don't, where we left off, I thought, okay, if we can figure out a couple little tweaks, and that's just like a technical change, and we go with it. But my
You
thought
talk
is that,
about both these topics, or you think?
well, for the site
This
coverage,
is
site
just trying to like,
coverage.
so if we're like, it's one thing, I think we're on the right track, but if we can't wrap this up in one more meeting, and we're comfortable doing all these changes in this time frame. So I wasn't sure how we were all gonna feel about that, because
I'd like to see that this year.
Yeah.
I think that under that kind of pressure if we all accept that. I don't know what people will have major issues with it or just trying to complete their understanding of it. It doesn't strike me as something that's gonna be all that time consuming. It's 20 minutes,
The site,
5 minutes, so, yeah.
I think we're getting really close
but for
with what Jackie did.
the changes that you have to go through to make sure we're consistent enough and throughout the bylaw, is that more?
No, I mean, this is it. This is,
Real, okay.
Yeah.
yeah, it's just that there's a lot more than we left off with, so I just want, if we're all comfortable moving forward on with this
Yeah, I
much
mean,
change.
if we could get to, you know, before the first week in January, if we can get through everything, and there's things like charts, graphs, photographs, you know, there's a lot of stuff,
Supporting documents.
supporting documents that, you know, to give Paul and Jackie like a good 3 weeks to kind of pull all this together, and then we collectively look at a final report together at the end of January. Was kind of the big goal. So why don't, do you,
So
So,
to have a, usually have a workshop with them.
and we have a workshop with the planning board right after the planning and ZBA.
so are we on now for the
The 29th?
29th at 6?
6 to 8,
6 to 7:30 for me.
you'll be exhausted. Well,
So maybe what we should see if this makes sense. I think it's especially good to have Carolyn on the
inclusion
housing stuff, the IZ stuff, because of the trust. So maybe we do that first so that we don't
that's fine.
lose you.
Yeah.
And we're here, town hall.
Yeah.
Will they let us in?
On the 29th?
We close
6 p.m.
at 6.
Oh, Paul, does this mean you have to come in? Is this your week's vacation?
No, I can do this.
Okay, all right, we're gonna do the 29th at 6 p.m. We're gonna do the 2 agenda items, inclusionary
In
first.
person or Zoom?
I heard in person was good for people, but otherwise people who want to, I don't care.
It's a hybrid, it's posted as a
It
hybrid meeting.
can be a hybrid.
And you can-
I'm here,
But
I'm
can
here.
be in the building 6 to 9.
Yes.
This building.
Yeah, it's a regular.
Yeah.
day.
So Carolyn is on Zoom, and Tom, were you on Zoom, or you could make the 29th? Okay,
I'm
so we're
here.
good. All right. So we get the 29th, and then what we won't try to decide today is maybe I can work with Paul and we could circulate a doodle poll to see if between the 1st and the 8th of January, we could get a long working session to kind of and get final drafts, or at least almost final drafts ahead of time. We come in and we just power through and try to knock off everything. Is that good for you, Paul and Jackie?
That'd be the week of the 5th.
Somewhere in the week of the 5th. We'll go out, I'll get my calendar, we'll go out with a poll to see if we can get some time.
So prep for the 29th. What are we doing?
We've got to finish inclusionary
Inclusionary.
and hopefully site coverage.
Okay.
And then we'll have those.
Or
I'll
far?
go through the,
fi-
look at the calendar now. If for that week, it's
Okay, we can look.
easier than emailing back and forth.
Okay, that's fine.
If we had to punt on one of these topics till next year, Paul, you're feeling. I think both of them are going to get done this week. Which one would you feel? You think the site coverage is the one that would needs the most input, or the? I guess the feel is, where do we feel we're closest to? Inclusionary or the site coverage?
I don't think we're that.
I don't think I think we're both in, said. All right,
Sure.
since I haven't put anything in. Paul and Jackie, you have a lot of, you're working, you have a lot of standing meetings and
So we're talking the week of the 5th.
week of the 5th. Oh, and it would have to be before the 9th. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of that week. And we're talking about a fairly long meeting, maybe like people want to do into 2. And we'll bring in lunch.
I'll be on Zoom.
You'll be on Zoom
I'm flying away. But I'm not gonna be here.
on the week of the 5th.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. All right. But you're,
She's gonna zoom it, yeah.
you're Zoom.
Don't
So
know the lunch. But
Jackie, Paul, do you have any
Oh my,
anyway, good.
Virginia Beach.
any
See my point.
no-go times we want us to avoid? You probably don't want this Monday morning on the 5th. But other than that, I mean, we've been doing Tuesdays from 10, and we do,
Tuesday's a holiday, the 6th, for us anyway, Three Kings Day,
oh, okay,
so that's a family holiday.
okay.
Which is Tuesday?
Monday the 5th is-
January 6th.
Three Kings, it's the 12th day of Christmas.
My wife's birthday.
The two reasons.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we,
How about Thursday, the 8th?
I'm not
Mary,
sure.
I'll have to get back.
Is Monday not-
Get something going.
What?
I think it's that.
Monday not
I
available?
have no idea which.
Not for me.
I check with Barbara and see.
can we, do you want to try you don't know?
I have no idea. It's something that week, but I don't know what day it is. If it's Friday, it doesn't matter, but I don't know.
Okay,
Wednesday the 7th?
let's get 2 dates.
I can.
Could do Monday, just, we don't know what Kevin is. Is Monday and Wednesday from 10 to 2 open?
I
And
can't do Monday.
you can't do Monday. It's and
Wednesday,
somebody,
Thursday.
Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, Wednesday would be my preferred, but that's okay. I can do it.
I can do either.
Wednesday,
I can do
the 7th or the 8th, 10 to 2. That's the big wrap, and we will hopefully, Kevin, you will,
I'll get back.
You get-
It's either Wednesday or Thursday.
Wednesday or Thursday, yeah. And if Kevin can let us know today, we'll just,
Yeah, there's no other meeting,
My gut tells me that.
either now, either of those days, so.
I'm not sure about the date, but I don't.
CPA meetings on Wednesday.
you got a CPA, meeting?
All of.
Just Paul, do you?
No, it's not till
That's next
Fine.
one.
5.
5, okay. All right, we're down to 2 dates, and that's gonna be the marathon session, and we'll get pizza or something, to do something, just to
Yeah, my own pizza.
sustain us. Okay. All right, well, we got a minute to go. Do I have any other business since,
So before the meeting on the 7th or 8th, I'll need to send everybody everything for that meeting,
the drafts?
which I will.
Yeah, and we have, I'm looking at, Paul has been giving us, I was going through it last night, pages and pages of marked up stuff, so we just gotta get it, and we've been giving it feedback, so, okay. Thank you all, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So
So moved, second? All right, all in favor?
Second, who's second?